Welcome to the Thinking Tackle podcast. Now, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And today I am joined in the studio by a man whose time at the heart of the British carp scene did coincide with some of the very best carp we have ever had. And he caught them as well. So, James Turner, thank you so much for coming in. It's been a little while since I've seen you last. And in fact, it's taken me a little while to get you on here. So thank you for coming.
You're more than welcome, Rich.
Now, I think you might actually have done more research for this podcast than I have. You told me before we rolled that you had been trawling the archives to remind yourself of what you did. So a nice journey down memory lane.
It was very, very kind of cathartic. I feel like I'm 21, but I'm definitely not.
You don't look that different. The beard is a new thing, isn't it? And there's less
hair,
less volume in terms of hair. Yeah.
And I'd like to think I've matured a bit as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really interesting. There's so much that I'd forgotten, and there was kind of people and places, and so I read through. I didn't want to come in here. Sorry, I didn't want to come in here and you be reading off stuff and me just not remembering that I'd done it.
Yeah,
which was a possibility.
No, you've always had an eye for the detail, mate. I think.
Oh, thank you.
I feel that anyway. I think I first bumped into you on the car park lake.
No, we went round Frogmore.
Yes, was that before that then?
Yeah, I think that was a year after I caught it, and you wouldn't have slid into my DMs, but you got hold of me somehow.
I emailed you.
You emailed me, and we went and we had a walk around.
Kindly walked around Frogmore, and I did a few ill-fated winter sessions on that.
That was it, yeah.
What a lovely, characterful pit that was, and actually we've got a mate of yours, Tom Lorraine, coming in later in the week.
Yep.
Just trailing the next podcast. Someone else who fished down that sort of that area at that time. We're going to talk about basically. I think what we're going to do today, looking at the folders that you prepared for us off the back of your research, it literally is a roll call of some of the, like I say, some of the very finest carp that were around in that period. I think. I mean, you were quite young. Let's not forget when you sort of started on this journey. How old would you have been?
So I went back in my diary and looked at all of the items that I collated, and I got my first ticket for Tol Pits, which was on the Watford Piscators ticket in 2003. So I think I'd have been 15, 16.
Wow.
But I didn't fish Tol Pits until 2004, 2005. So yeah, it's a long time ago. It's getting on for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And I caught Plodder in 2005, and I was young and I jumped in at the deep end. Looking back, I look now and I just think I was not ready to go and do that.
That was going to be my question, actually.
Yeah.
What made you think that you were ready?
I don't know. I was fishing the other lakes along there, and I had the time, and I had the enthusiasm, and I thought, why not? I'd caught a few fish from around the complex and fished some other lakes, and I remember watching, I don't know whether it was before or after I fished on Tol Pits, but Carp in Focus with Chris Ball, and he did a section on there with Terry, and I'd read Terry's writing about it as well, and it took me a while to put two and two together that they were the same lakes, but you were walking past that lake to go down to some of the others, and it's just another lake. It wasn't very big, and looking back now, it's tiny.
Yeah.
Incredibly, I was looking at a map that someone had drawn of it, and there was like 20 swims on a 4-acre lake, and I remember at the time it was your free swims up, actually you're only 20 yards, and it was a real learning curve, and had to learn the hard way. My gear wasn't ready for it, I wasn't ready for it, but I have to shout out, some of the lads that were on there were just absolute diamonds, and they really looked after me and helped me find my way, and I think mainly making sure I was safe for the carp as much as anything. And that's something I've tried to take away as well, and I've tried to help some other people who I've seen in a similar situation, because I've jumped in with both feet young, and done some, probably looking back, stupid things. And
what kind of guys were we talking about on there at the time?
So when I fished it, there's people like Jake Slattery and BT Darren, and some of these guys that I still see round and about, and they're still on the circuit, and you still see them at different lakes. And they gave me some unbelievable advice. Paul Terry, who was at Angling Intelligence at the time, he really helped me out. I mean, to put it into context, I had a stove that used methylated spirits.
Okay.
So it would take half an hour to boil the kettle, particularly when it was cold. So Paul used to call me when he was leaving work to put the kettle on, and he'd get down and it probably still wouldn't be boiled.
No. Yeah. I mean, how do you even, I wouldn't know where to buy one from.
It came from
Camping
when I was
shop.
in Scouts.
Okay.
You know, it was my old Trangia. And I
Amazing.
just carried on using it.
Presumably that didn't last very long.
No.
Toby, you just flashed up a picture. Let's have a little look at the old setup, JT, from that era. If is this this is the Tol Pits era. What we're talking heavily. It looked to me. Talk me through that, because there's a bit, like you mentioned, Terry. There's bound to be influence.
Yeah.
An angler of your age, you're right in the eye of of his most influential period, aren't you? Really?
Yeah, it was reading In Pursuit kind of lit that fire and changed the course of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very heavily influenced from that.
Do you think that people nowadays are too quick to sort of say that they weren't influenced by Terry? It's almost become like a caricature, hasn't it? You know, like, but you're quite happy to say that the Nevilles are there and the Tawneys are there because of that.
It was, you know, that was a good starting point for kit that was reliable and worked, and it looked fantastic. It still does.
Still got that kit?
Yeah.
So what have we got? We've got, is that Neville stainless at the front, the single bars?
It could well be.
Potentially some quite brand new looking. The Nevs look good at that. They look new at that stage.
Yeah, they were new.
Yeah, but is that fluorocarb? Is that some kind of like big game? Is it what?
I think that might have been crystalline.
Okay. Was that fluorocarbon coated mainline?
I don't really know what it was, but it was okay.
And the old Chub Barrow in the background that everyone had at that stage as well. I mean, I had one as well.
Yeah, really good.
Absolute workhorse. Did nothing, but it, did nothing to go wrong
and
either. So
very big.
Yeah.
So trying to get it into your boot I had a Peugeot 106, and that frame didn't break down, so it's probably 4 foot long. Took up most of the car.
That'd be a tight squeeze in that motor, wouldn't it?
Yeah, everything was. I mean, I was a tight squeeze of that motor. I might as well have sat on the back seat.
And I remember from reading in your Forgotten Chapters stuff, I think that you fished with Bailey on there as well. Did you meet Ian on there?
Yeah, I met Bailey on there. So I fished a little bit after school and summer holidays in between year. It'd been my year at sixth form, and then when I could drive in my first or second year, it kind of blurs into one. But when I could drive, I started going there more. And then I left school and I was going off to university, college, and I had a gap year with no intention of knowing what I was going to do other than just fish as much as I could. And I fished really hard through that autumn on Tol Pits. And that's one from about the time I met Bailey. That was one of the stockies. I had to chuck that in there.
That's amazing. I didn't know that had fish like that in there.
Yeah. So when I fished there, that second year, they'd put some fish in the winter. And then the big common died, Arthur died, and a couple of others died. So there was Plodder, Leicester's, and then, you know, a good amount of the old guard, but there was still a few coming through like this. And then you had some of the renegade commons that had been in there a couple of years, and they were kind of mid doubles going forward.
I mean, just for those people listening, this is quite a pale carp. Sort of not. I mean, let's be nice to it. It's a leathery one, which is obviously in keeping with the kind of Italian strain that lake had at the time. Sort of buttery yellow around the anal fin, sort of short-headed. I mean, he's not pretty, is he?
No.
But then the Tol Pits fish weren't.
No, and this was in a period of change for the lake. It had gone from when Gary Newman fished it, and then, you know, the earlier generations. Around this time, a lot of the old stock was starting to die out. There was a lot more people on there, and they put in the restriction on how far you could live away from Watford to get a ticket, and it was getting quite a lot of press. And it was a real period of change. It had gone from being an overgrown kind of mature place, and even in the time I was there, you know, there was a lot of change going on. And that year, so that had been 2006 in the summer, I'd caught Plodder the autumn before, after just a horrific blank spell of just learning the hard way how to catch them. What was the
kind of eureka moment then that allowed you to get that one in the bag?
Just sheer persistence,
bloody mindedness,
and youthful ignorance.
Right. What do you think you were doing wrong, looking back?
So I'd had 2 the year before, fishing right in the edge, and I mean under your feet in the edge.
Kind of the Tol Pits,
which was the Tol Pits way.
Yeah.
And then when I came back in 2005, it was colder. I was fishing from kind of September onwards, and I was still trying to catch them right in the edge, and it was too late. You know, you might see them there, but it's not the time for it. And then it was fishing more out in the open water, and some of the guys, you know, teaching me a bit more about baiting and and how to present a little bit better. And,
Yeah.
you know, they were no pushover. They've been fished for
No.
hard,
Tricky.
really hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky and caught plodder.
Did the obviously I think Tell published his Still Searching book around that time.
That
sort
would
of
have been
06.
It was 06.
Was it later than that?
Yes, it was.
But did you see? Was that around the time that they pulled the radius in, sort of thing? Because obviously it would have sort of kicked on another.
It'd been roughly about that time.
yeah.
It's all a bit foggy.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a little while ago now, isn't it? But,
Yeah.
But I mean, it must be quite exciting to be reading about the lake you were fishing, though.
Yeah.
Even if some of the fish were gone.
Yeah. You just can't beat. And it's I don't want to sound like I'm a grumpy old man, but it's not worse. It's just different. Because if you ask me about fish now, I could get my phone and pull up loads of pictures. But back then it was magazines, it was books, and it just felt very different.
Yeah.
And yeah, catching a fish that you'd read so much about and seen was just incredible.
Had you, were you a sort of a collector of images at this stage in terms of the fish that you were looking to catch?
Yes. I would go through Carp Talk, Angling Times, Anglers Mail, and if it said Hearts Club Lake or anywhere local, I cut it out, and I've still got them somewhere.
Yeah.
Like I was talking about that fish, which from now Waterside Mick, I've still got a couple of snippings of that from somewhere. And I think at one point I thought it was in Tol Pits because it looked just like one of those. But trying to work out where fish were from was hard.
And part of the fun, though.
Yeah, it was great fun.
Yeah.
I remember if you leap forward a couple of years, I was on Marlow and I'd seen the picture of Martin Clark with that fish, and I sat there talking to someone, and I knew there was a 40-pound common in there, and I just happened to say about, have you seen that picture? He went, well, you're fishing for it. That's in here. And it blew my mind because I didn't correlate two and two together.
Yeah.
I'd seen that fish coming through, but I didn't know it was from there. I hadn't put two and two together that fish was in there.
We'll definitely get onto that because the Marlow's a little way down the line. Toby's just popped up an image of plodder and taking it away again. We'll find it.
Look at that red face.
It's so red, it's blue, mate.
This is also taken off a 1.3 megapixel compact camera.
I mean, it holds up quite well on the big screen. Again, for people listening, can you describe to us what plodder was like?
So plodder was a big, chunky, Italian-y looking carp. Really dark. That photo doesn't do it justice for its kind of depth of colour. Had a massive tail. The wrist of the tail was ginormous, and its mouth was huge. I remember. I mean, I caught that on a size 10 long shank, and unhooking that, you're just putting your whole hand in the mouth to unhook it. It's it's a massive fish, and that had come through the ranks and carried on for a few years after then, got up to 50. But a very, very, very special fish. And
wrinkly flanks, sort of like grey.
I've got some slide images of this that Darren took for me, and they're the best I've got, but I've never digitized them, which I really should.
Absolutely.
But,
would you say this was is this a big moment in you as a young big carp angler, as you like?
Definitely. You can realise that it is achievable, and they're just fish. And I don't think I knew at the time how good it was. That's probably one of the best fish I've ever caught. And ironically, it's one of it is the first big carp I ever caught.
So at this stage, you're what? Are you 17, 18?
I'd have been 18, 19 around that time.
Yeah.
And I just, it was such a blur catching it. I remember getting it in the net and shouting over to Bubs, "Oh, I've got one." And he was like, "Oh, how big is it?" And I thought it was a low 30.
Yeah.
So I thought it might be baby plodder. And it was only when I tried to manoeuvre it, I went, "Oh, maybe it is plodder." And he came round, and sure enough, it was plodder. And it was horrendous weather. It was absolutely textbook. It was low pressure, really wet. And this was probably mid-afternoon. And
it looks like the night. But
it wasn't, just because it's flash shots. And, I know I spoke about my stove earlier, but I had terrible sleeping bags. I had terrible cameras. I just didn't have the right kit. And taking photos at this time was really, really difficult. And the fish didn't want to behave. And it was far bigger than, it's 10 pounds bigger than anything I'd ever caught.
How big was
before.
it? Sorry.
44.4.
So huge, yeah.
Huge.
By anyone's standards.
Yeah. And a unique shape, so wide, and trying to hold it. And I've got some returners, and I just look so relieved I'm back in the water. And all I wanted to do was, having the pictures, at the time didn't feel important. I just wanted to hold it and then put it back and just know it was going to be safe, because it felt like I was in such a privileged position to be holding that fish.
Were you aware at the time that these were old carp?
Yeah. There was a lot of emphasis, and you know, that was where the guys who I was fishing with, they'd really looked after me and, you know, given me a bit of background on the history and helped me out. And it is important to know, you know, I don't think anyone knows where they came from.
Just thought that's the other side.
It's actually a much better shot.
Yeah, and same, it might be, the other one might be off little Jason's camera, that might be off mine, but yeah.
You see, but the shape looks, that's more sort of sympathetic to its shape. I think you can see the sloping head, the big mouth, the leathery flanks, and like you say, that huge thick tail wrist.
Yeah, and it fought just like its name suggested. It just went up and down the shelf really deep, and that came off the back of seeing a few fish show out in the open water and moving around, and 24 hours of just them showing and sheeting up, and they probably cleared me out. Went back to the tackle shop, got some more hemp, cast the rig out and had it pretty quickly.
So what were you presenting over this hemp?
This was just over kind of like a firm silt.
Yep.
I can't really remember what it was like exactly.
How are you introducing the hemp even? You're spotting? Catapulting?
Catapult, yeah.
Oh, short range then?
Yeah, really close range.
Right.
Just at the bottom of the shelf, underarm flick.
But which practically by Tol Pits standards constitutes open water, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not right up there, right up the shelf. Boilie over the top of that?
Yep. Boilie on a bottom bait. Just a simple braided rig.
I mean, we will talk a bit about technology at some stage, maybe now. But you were quite well known for the whole long shank rig thing, and evidently right from the start of your big carp fishing. I mean, were you thinking about it then? Because it wasn't an obvious choice to go for that.
No. I mean, so that would have been 2005, and before I was using the long shanks, and that was on, I'm pretty sure that was a Korda long shank.
Yeah. An X, it would have been an X, wouldn't it?
I think it would have been an X. But before that, I was using the G7, which was like a predecessor to the Big T. So it's almost like a short, straight point, and you just basically carbon copied. Yeah, carbon copied that rig over, and it seemed to work really well.
I'm curious about what made you make the change, though. You know, in your embryonic big carp career, what were you thinking about the way rigs worked that made you choose to go to a longer shank hook than one you were using already?
I honestly couldn't tell you.
No.
I just remember picking them up, and they were infinitely sharper than anything I'd used.
Yeah.
They looked right, and I remember some of the guys, they'd used long shank hooks, and it looked
Bit of a shrink tube kicker going on.
Yep, a little bit of a shrink tube kicker.
There is no doubt that they turn better than anything, don't they?
And that was with a bit of silicone up on the hook.
Yeah.
And so the bait, or the hair with the bait, was almost leaving right round the bend.
Okay.
So it was cranked round like almost a flip.
I'd envisaged it being opposite the barb, but no, you were taking it right round.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for some reason I moved over to using a ring on the back, like a blowback. And then a few years later, I went back to the silicone again because it just worked so much better. But if you're using a balance bait, using a ring on the back definitely seemed to aid it.
I mean, it seems funny looking back, doesn't it? That period was probably right in the middle of that whole, like, an inverted comma, air quoting, the Korda's like flipper type rig that Dan and Damo had shown in various places with the silicone push right round, and everybody used it. Nobody uses it.
It would probably be off the back of that, because I remember getting the first underwater DVD. It was the first DVD I'd ever bought. I went out and bought that and watched that, and so it was probably off the back of that.
Would that have been the Welly one at that stage?
No, that'd have been the horseshoe.
The horseshoe one. Okay.
Around that.
Because I think they filmed the Welly one in 05, didn't they? So it wouldn't have been out till a couple of years later. But I mean, even Terry, still uses it to this day, doesn't he? That whole flipper type, albeit with a shorter hook. So Plodder wasn't the end for you on Tol Pits, was it? So tell me how that campaign unfolded, and once you'd got that one under your belt, did you find that you were going at it with renewed confidence, or let's face it, not renewed confidence, but perhaps confidence that you hadn't experienced before?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I caught Plodder at the start of November, and I went off and got a job and worked from probably middle of November right through till April.
Just saving up.
The season on Tol Pits started in May, and I left my job the last weekend of April and went and lived down Tol Pits for the rest of the summer. And
you Bailey still sort of.
So Bailey came on there that summer.
Right.
I'd already caught Plodder.
You were the same. You're similar age, aren't you? I think so. It must have been quite nice to see someone else.
Definitely.
To share those
someone at the same age as you. And Bailey was really, forward on his fishing. He was far better than me, still is.
Right.
His technology and everything that goes with it. He just,
So it was good. You bounced ideas off each other, though, presumably.
Yeah.
And you'd already caught Plodder, for God's sake, and he's caught. He's come on there, and you're already like 44 pounds to the good. In that sense.
Yep.
How did you work your way into your next bite?
So I didn't catch any more that season. I went back at the end of the season because I'd accrued some holiday. I did 3-4 nights for nothing and saw a couple of guys catch some, but nothing to me. And then I went back in May, and by that point I was just ready to go. I had a bit more experience, had a bait that worked, rigs that worked, and just.
How did you decide that this bait was going to be the one? Like what gave you that confidence?
I don't really know.
You're able to sort of to watch them eat it, for instance. Or
You'd see them eating it, and I'd go down there in the closed season, and I don't know if I was allowed to do that. Definitely.
They're not going to ban you now, mate. Okay. Don't worry.
I'd caught one on it, and at that time that was good enough for me, and it was a good bait, and it was easy to get and available, and it was at a good price, so it worked out well. And then as I carried on, a few of the other lads were using that and similar variations on it, and So just that confidence you've now rolled into this. Having said that, you have blanked a lot. Up to that point. So between the Plodder and the next capture. So I hadn't blanked that much because before Plodder I'd blanked a lot, and then after Plodder I pretty much wrapped up straight away and got a job, and then came back at the start of the season.
So it was that May. Sorry.
It was that next May.
The following May.
Right, and I hit the ground running. I caught 20 odd fish over that summer, but no Leicesters, but there was quite a lot of fish like that that stocky we looked at. There was a few other little commons. There was one called Sputnik I had a couple of times. That was a nice fish, really different
type thing.
And sandy, kind of random two-toned one that I think was an original, not really sure.
A Sputnik, isn't it?
Yep, that's
what
Sputnik.
A great carp. That's
special.
I'm sure Gary said that when we did the podcast, that was from another lake originally, from one of the other lakes in that area. We moved in, as opposed to being one of the original Tol Pits fish that
it's all been lost in the kind of.
It might not take that much digging because it might be in the Gary Newman podcast that we did. But anyway, great carp. Sort of we're going to call it a halfling, very sort of traditional, lovely old looking carp. And he was around. He was almost one of the last ones to go, wasn't he, from memory?
Yep, that and Jerry's and a couple of the others carried on for quite a while.
Yeah. What do you remember around that capture? Because that's one of the lovely mirrors of the lake, isn't it?
So that one was probably a month after the season had started, and that was in a swim called the Stumps, and it was a really popular swim. And at this point, I was really trying to catch Leicesters. Leicester's or the Italian, but Leicester's I had to get it. It was the other 40, so it was the one I really wanted to catch. And actually it was the first fish I'd seen on the bank, or one of the first fish I'd seen on the bank there. A guy had caught it, and I remember just reeling in and running round. When I heard the shout, I just wanted to see it on the bank, and I decided I wanted to see it. And this year Leicester's came out quite a lot. The water level was really down all around the valley. The water level was really down, and it kind of changed the fishing from being in the margin to being open water. And I was fishing with boilies, and I'd been trickling a bit of bait in there because it was right in the middle of the carp bank. And then I dropped in there when I saw quite a few shows one morning, and then had that one the next morning. And I remember that was on a really balanced wafter because it was a really kind of erky spot. And I was using a really stiff hook link. I can't remember what it was. It might have been hybrid stiff. And I remember using a barrel hook bait, and it just sank away perfectly. And I cast out, and that was the first one I had off the spot. And I had another common the next morning, and then didn't catch anything off it there.
Do you think that these fish were feeding silt habitually, or were they wary of the gravel spots at this stage, being such a small pressured lake?
There wasn't a huge amount of kind of polished spots out in the lake. There was no big variance on kind of bars or anything. It was all the margin was the main feature, and there's pads and snags, and one by one those snags got removed, and the lilies, and it was just fishing out in the open water. And it just, that's where the fish were coming from, and you ended up fishing there for them.
Leicester's, you did catch, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah. Was it a targetable fish?
That year, it seemed to come out every other day.
Right.
It did loads of catches.
Which must have fried you, really.
It made it even worse.
Yeah.
I remember I photographed it. I think it might have been the same day I had Sandy. I photographed it for Tony with the dog, and it was 46 pounds, and it was massive, and it looked incredible.
Yeah.
And then Tony caught it 2 more times. I think he might have caught it on consecutive mornings, once on the left-hand rod and then once on the right-hand rod, and it came out loads, and it was just on a mad one.
Right.
And so that was my kind of gap year, and I got through to September, and I was due to go off to college, university at the end of the month. And I just thought that was me done. I thought I'm not going to catch it this summer, and that's, it's game over. And then I hadn't got a parking permit for the lake. For the lake, I definitely had a parking permit. Didn't have a parking permit where I'd moved to, so I had to come back and get my car and then take it back. And so I dropped in to do a night and walked around and found Leicester's up in the pads, fished for it, lost one. And I remember at the time just being convinced that I'd lost Leicester's, because Leicester's was charging through the pads, shoulders going, and I flicked a rod out very quickly that evening, had a take and lost it. And I thought, well, not going to catch this one, that's me done. And Jerry went round and he said, no, Leicester's still over there, hasn't been lost. And I reeled in because I think I'd done a very half-assed flick out. And when I recast, I put some bait out and then settled down for the evening, and then had an incredible take. And I was
ripper, true ripper. Yeah.
I was in the swim next door, and you just heard that Neville crying out from down the bank, and I've run down, and it went up the lake and just beasted me about, and it just came up in the water, and Lloyd was on the net. I just remember him going forward to sweep it, and I had a net, and it was quite a nice net, but I didn't have enough tension in the arms or something had worn. Yeah. And as he's caught on something, he's gone like that, and the net's just collapsed, and there's a big fish on the surface, and I'm just there, and it's just gasping water, and I was thinking, and I just kind of let it roll down again while he's getting this net, and it was off a bit of scaffold pole that obviously used to cause or was building a swim that had then collapsed, and it was caught on that, and he got it off, and it came round, and that was the longest 20 seconds of my life. And eventually it went in the net.
Did you know it was Leicester's at that point, do you think?
I'm not sure. I don't think I did. I just remember thinking it was a big fish, and then it went in the net, and I gave the loudest shout I've ever given. I was so chuffed, and it just felt, the thing that made that capture really special is I'd fished all summer, I'd learned so much, and I'd really wanted to catch that one, but it felt like the national lottery. It could just be anywhere on the lake, and just there we go. And then to have that feeling that I'm not going to catch it this year, come back and catch it on a random night, which I wasn't even meant to be doing, just that was icing on the cake for me. Really, 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 that one, for how much I worked for it and how many hours and nights I did, that one for me was probably, although looking back, Plodder was definitely the nicer and the maybe more special fish, that one meant a lot more to me.
And actually, once again, looking at the picture of it, mate, incredible nick these fish were in, given how old they were even then. Yeah,
and that one had been caught quite a few times that year.
Yeah, and
it spawned really heavily. But by this point, I'd got an SLR, so the pictures get better from here. Right.
One thing that stands out about it is those little pearly scales down by the tail. I don't think I'd ever really noticed those before. But you've got I think it's a sixth. It's not even a quarter lin, is it? It's just about.
No, it's a quarter lin, and it's got some nice scaling. The other side was nice as well, and just a massive frame on it.
Yeah,
really nice.
And just when you reflect on these fish, how the heck did they get that big in what was quite a silty, sheltered, all the things that you wouldn't want an embryo lake to be now? Really,
no, it's
full of bream,
just good strain.
Yeah.
Good strain, and it got a lot of bait.
The side, right? So he's got a ton of those pearly ones on this side as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a lump, isn't it?
It is.
Looking at it, that's probably not his best side, is it? That one, to be fair.
And looking back, the variety of fish that are in there. I mean, all the ones I caught were pretty much of that kind of strain. But then when you look back at some of the older ones, Arthur and the Italian, Arthur was just, where did it come from? That real dumpy shape, and the commons were lovely, and it was just a real. I don't think I ever realised how good I had it, because if that lake was about now, it'd blow your mind.
Yeah, That's very true. And you've mentioned it. You were off to uni.
Yep.
Did you have plans? Were you like, no, this is not the end for me? Because quite often, you know, studies / drinking / socialising certainly calls a halt. It calls time on people's fishing, doesn't it? Were you determined that it wasn't going to be that way for you?
I don't remember ever contemplating it. I was just, at this point, I was just living, breathing, eating, fishing.
So uni was going to be a huge distraction to that quest, wasn't it? Because you can't do it.
No, but I could.
But you did have
that first year.
Yeah.
I just burned the candle at both ends. And actually, when I was on Tol Pits, I'd already got the ticket for Frogmore.
Yes.
And Tol Pits, as we said, was very small, and it was hard, especially with fish coming out. And I was there a lot, and you felt like you're constantly chasing your tail at times, and you didn't always have the option to move. And if you did, you're moving 10 yards down to your right. So I'd got a ticket on Frogmore, and I'd been around there quite a bit. And Frogmore was so close to where I was living at my parents' house. You could be there in 5 minutes. So I'd spent a lot of time walking around there, baiting. I think I'd done 3-4 nights in the summer, caught a couple of tench, done some stalking, come really close to catching them.
Yeah.
And it just was a natural step onto there.
Let's paint the picture of the Toadless Lake. Fearsome reputation, not just for the fishing at the time. I'm sure, how much of it was the truth, you know, in terms of cars getting burnt out and broken into, that kind of thing. I'm sure it's different now, but it wasn't the most salubrious, was it then?
No. I mean, the first time I went there with my fishing tackle, there was a burnt out car in the car park.
Yeah.
And it was there for a while.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it was an angler's car. But yeah, it had a reputation, and I was young. I was 18, 19, and all of the information was coming from articles or from the Cemex forum. Yeah. And it painted a pretty scary picture. I remember the first time I walked around there, I walked in from the far end so that my car was parked up on the nice road. And I remember I didn't take my phone with me, and I put my car key in my sock because I was so convinced I was going to get mugged or something around there. And I look back now and I do chuckle to myself, but you just didn't know. And I was a nervous kid.
But by percentage, what do you think the percentage of that was the truth, and how much was a blind to stop people?
I think most of it had elements of truth, and I think it had just been a bit blown up out of proportion. I never had any issues over there. And I met some of the young lads around there. They'd probably been similar age to me at school, and they were all right. Yeah. You know, there was scramblers and quad bikes and stuff going around, and it was a bit of the Wild West, but you just tuck yourself out your way and you take your chance.
Yeah, I mean, people walk their dogs through there every day, don't they? It's normal for people to be there, and like you say, it's very public, but that's the worst of it, really, I suppose. But and let's face it, the cars that were burnt out, like you say, joyriders, they dumped the cars and set them alight, and there was no danger to you as such. What an atmospheric group of pits, though.
Really nice. And they still are nice, actually. I went back there, I mean, I was going to say last year, but it's probably been 5-6 years, and they're different, but they're still, they've got a nice atmosphere to them. And when I first went on there, it was on the interim period between, I think, did London Anglers have it? And then Verulam took it on. Yeah. And I think I had a ticket the first year Verulam had it, but I'd been over there that year before, after I caught Plodder, mooching around, doing all sorts of stuff. And it was a unique lake, really nice.
Describe it for us.
So if you were to look at it on Google Maps, you would just think there's no way there's a 40 pound lever.
Toby might do this for us. Go on.
There's no way that a 40 pound lever lives in there.
Yeah.
And it was half mangrove and then a few bits of open water. And when I actually came to fish it in 2006, again, the water level was really down, which made it really easy because most of the places where this fish would normally hold up couldn't get to. So some of the bars that ran around the lake prevented the fish getting in half the places that it would normally live and be out of bounds. So it actually made it quite easy. The water was clear. You could walk out on the bars and look into spots and probably walk on spots where fish had been caught from.
Amazing. I mean, dreamy little gravel. I mean, if you could design a little intimate gravel pit, it looks something like the pit at Moor Mill, isn't it?
Yes.
People would know. We'd have to direct Toby in to have a little look at this.
Is this Frogmore? Yeah?
No, yes, but wouldn't be known as that. Is it? If you put in Frogmore,
if you put in Frogmore or Park Street.
Park Street, yeah.
So it's not that one.
Oh no, that's
No. That's definitely not it.
yeah, that's.
I don't think that's anywhere near it.
No. If you put in Park Street, Hertfordshire, but such a cool place, and obviously again, Terry has just published his book, and he had that as part of a run of fish, which obviously you then went on to do as well.
Yeah. So I remember I caught this fish. If you just go there,
Yeah, that's it, mate.
to the left there, Toby. There you go. So it's that top left in there.
So it's the pit, that one,
that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Zoom us in over the top, because you've got what is the Island Lake? Is it on the right
Yep.
here? Is that what it's
Island
called?
Lake, and then you've got the Pike Pit.
Yes,
and you've got the
the long
School
thin
Pit
one.
further up.
Were the pads as dense as that when you were there?
They were, but the water was down. So if you look at the pads on the left-hand side there, you
Yeah.
can see in the corner a bit of a bar.
Yes.
So that bar ran all the way across to those trees at the bottom there.
Yeah,
that's
that's
it.
it, Tobes, yeah.
So this bar,
Did that cut off all that to the left then?
yeah, that was all cut off. And I caught my first fish, which was I think 17, 18 pound common off that bar, fishing in where those pads are.
Right.
But it wasn't as heavily padded as that. It was just weed.
How did you resist the temptation of going straight onto that little dot island and fishing across to the bit that Tel caught it from?
Because you could walk round there and it was out of the water.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, to look at that lake now, when I caught it in November, you could get up the trees and have a look at everywhere. And where your cursor is right now, Toby, that was the only bit of water from there down to the right that you couldn't see couldn't see the lake bed. Everywhere else you could see. And that area just behind where the cursor is there, I was fishing from that gap below your cursor.
Across to the snags.
I was quite a way off the snags.
Yeah.
I was probably halfway between the island and the snags. And from memory, I think there was a bar that ran along the entrance there, just where your cursor is. And I was just fishing over the back in the smooth silt. Again, how I caught them at Tol Pits, scattering a boilies, and just a bottom bait rig over the top.
Was it fortuitous then that all of that water to the left, the finger bays that you can't really see there either, there's actually a finger bay that projects into that, or in fact, there might be two there that project into the woodland there.
Yeah.
That's
Either
all out
side
of
of that
commission.
point. Yeah, they had nowhere to hide, and you would see them if you look at that top end where the island is.
Right at the top corner.
There was a spot up there, and I've got a photo of the fish milling around that island there. And I came really close, but the lever, she just never looked that comfortable in the shallow water. She's a big fish. She would be in there, and she just never looked as comfortable. Whereas some of the smaller ones, if you fed them the right bait, they would just sit there and eat it all day long. Yeah.
Are you still using the Perfection ground bait stuff at this stage?
No, so this was Carp Company. I was using the Icelandic Red.
Okay, yeah.
So I used that for a couple
Classic.
of years, and I didn't go on to the Perfection until probably 2008.
Right. Okay. So Carp Company. I mean, the Ice Reds were like
Just classic.
Yeah. I mean, like a really well thought of bait in the Colne Valley sort of area.
Yeah.
I mean, albeit this isn't the Colne Valley, this is Hertfordshire, but in fact, you've got I believe it's
River
the Ver.
Yeah.
So crystal clear.
Yep.
Runs around the bottom of the lake here. The water quality must have been decent. I mean, looking with your sort of fisheries head on, we haven't even talked about your job, but you're around lakes a lot at the time now. Did these have what it took to produce big fish, do you think?
Well,
Or was
obviously,
it a freak?
I don't know. I don't know how. I know some of the backup stock have got bigger in there, but I don't know what's left and how
No.
big they've got to.
I think in the Island Lake as well, that the stockies that went in there doing okay.
Yeah.
I don't.
There's quite a few crayfish in the other lake,
Right.
in the Island Lake, and there could well be some in the Lever Lake now. But yeah, it was just a very odd lake. And as you look at that there, the bank up the top, that's a steep high bank. So you're up on the horsefields there, and there's a good old drop down into the lake.
You can almost see like a line of hawthorns at the top of that meadowy bit, can't
That's
you?
it.
Where literally it's a cliff,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Like you say, you walked me round there.
it had a real nice atmosphere to it, and it never, when I got used to it, and then when I went back subsequently to see my friends fishing there, it just had a nice atmosphere to it. I never felt intimidated.
Who were you seeing? Who was fishing it when you rocked up?
I'd never really met anyone.
Really?
No,
Had it to yourself.
I had it to
living the dream.
There was a guy on there, Gary Leake,
Yeah.
Frodo, who at the time didn't like me.
Right.
But since he's been a really nice guy. But I've been there where you're on a lake and you put a lot in, and if someone else turns up, you go very Gollum and kind of protective, and it's easily done.
Yeah.
And I shook his hand when he caught it. I can't remember if he shook mine when I caught it, but yeah, there's water under the bridge, and he's a lovely bloke. So shout out to Gary.
You're turning up with time, which probably is the worst thing from the perspective of another angler as well.
Yeah.
Are you able to leverage your sort of your university holidays? Is that where this time's coming from, or are you just fishing in the week as well?
So I was fishing in the week as well, and so I caught Leicester's end of September, start of October, and then because my parents are up the road, I was still coming back quite a lot to see them, get some bits, moving my stuff up, and I'd drop in there, put a bit of bait in, have a walk round. I remember I was still using the garage local to there to do my MOT, or there's something, I want to say the boot of my car was like locked solid, and I came back to get it fixed, and I had a hire car, and that was when I caught that common stalking. And then because I was doing a kind of criminology degree, I came back in the half term, which was in November, and one of our bits of coursework was to go to a court and observe court proceedings. So I came back, and the Monday I went to court and watched everything going on.
What was it? Can you say?
I couldn't remember. I just remember
can't be that exciting.
It was in. It wasn't that exciting. It was just to understand the process and looking at how it was worked. And
not a murder then?
No, it was nothing exciting. I don't think. I can't remember it. And I only remembered that I went to court when I read back on some of the stuff I'd done. And I'd fished on the Saturday with a friend, Daryl, who I'd met on Tol Pits.
Daryl Style?
Yeah. No, not Daryl Style, sorry, Daryl Atkins.
Okay, right.
So Daryl Style is...
He was also in Tol Pits, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was before me.
Was it?
Yeah, that was before me. But no, Daryl Atkins and Dean Boy Band, those two guys, they were miles ahead of me. When I was on Tol Pits, they were miles, and they still are very good anglers, but they were just miles ahead of me. I remember I went perch fishing with Daryl on the Saturday, did some coursework, went to court on Monday, and then went fishing. I think I had 3 nights available, and that was when I caught the toadless.
We're not glossing over it to that degree. We need to know, so did you look to establish a bait? How did you zero in on the area that you were eventually going to catch it from? Was it in fact from that spot that you described, the deeper swim? Yeah. So I think I did 3 or 4 nights in the summer, and they were all in that swim. And again, a process of elimination. If you walk around the lake, you can see everywhere else. And as you went into the right in the deeper area, that was too deep and just felt a bit, bland. And it's probably 8 to 10 foot behind that bar, and it just felt right. And I caught some tench off there, put some bait out, and then every time I went past, I'd just put a couple more catapults in, and it just felt right. It just worked. Do you think, does instinct play a big role in your fishing? Obviously that's a gut feeling, isn't it? You've got nothing concrete there to go on, but you're persevering because it feels right. Yeah,
I think so. I'd seen a few fish show in that area as well, and it just everything.
The leather show, perhaps, or
I did on the day I caught it. I'm pretty sure I saw it the morning before.
Great,
it's just
for atmosphere.
Too textbook.
Yeah. Doesn't get better than that, does it? Surely.
No, and I'd seen it show. And funny enough, the year after, Ian went on there and fished, and he saw it show in that same area. And then that was when Gary caught it up the other end, and it was just off. I think it was a nice area for it to go through, because when you look at the lake, although if you look at it, it looks like a kind of C shape. Back when the water was up, they could get through all the islands and the snags, and there was a huge area where they could be and never be touched or fished for. And with that water being so far down, they couldn't get through those back channels, because all the bridges that people have built over the years to get through and wade out onto the islands to place their bait or look, they'd all blocked the channels. So you could walk out in trainers into these areas where the fish would have called home before. So now the fish is having to come around in front of that area to get from one end of the lake to the other. And if you saw it in the finger bays, which you do, or you saw it up the far end, it had to come through there. So it's a perfect intercept point, and it just, if you don't have anything concrete to go on or a spot, that middle zone, you can see as much of the lake as anywhere. It just felt really right. And, I was coming back. I hadn't fished it since August, other than a couple of stalking sessions, and it just felt right in there, and you had nothing else to go on. I fished one night in there. I don't remember if I saw anything or not, but that next day there was a guy doing day sessions literally in the peg next to me. So he looked after my gear, and I went round, got up every tree, walked on every bar, and looked, and it was gin clear, and the weed had all died back, and the fish weren't there. So they're going to be
elimination. Yeah,
it worked out really nicely.
Did you top up bait wise? Were you giving them a bit at that stage?
I wasn't fishing over a huge amount. It had probably been, 40 to 50 baits out there, I think. And I just remember the night, it was either the night before I caught it or the night before that. I just remember having an absolute nightmare because I wasn't fishing a particular spot, I was fishing a zone.
Yeah.
So I was fishing out, and I remember putting my marker float out and popping it up on the bar and where I wanted to be behind, and then I'd just freehand them out in the back. And as long as the drop was right, I'd just scatter the bait out there. And I hooked up one of my rods on the marker float because it was such a big crosswind coming through, and just everything went wrong. I turned over hook points, and I just remember putting my head in my hands and just being like, oh, what am I doing? What am I doing? But probably the second night, I remember getting them absolutely spot on. And then the next morning, seeing one show, just having nightmares with dog walkers, with dogs trying to steal biscuits and running in your swim. And you know
you're right on the track there, aren't you?
Yeah, right on the track. And I wasn't using a brolly anymore. I'd bought a nice kind of armadillo style shelter. I had a decent sleeping bag, so I was a lot more comfortable, and had an absolutely ripping take and played it like my life depended on it.
Because you kind of knew, or
don't know.
Could you tell from the weight of it? Do you think, early on?
When I was playing it, it felt like a really good fish, and that fish was probably 10 plus pounds bigger than anything else in there, and it charged about. And despite the fact it had a little tail, it really did run me ragged, and ran me. Almost tried to go behind the island, kited back round, and certainly got my money's worth out of that fish.
Now, you're making it look quite small there. This is a big fish because you're a big guy, but I think that would be my favourite carp ever if I'd caught that one.
Yeah.
Like, just awesome. The place it lives, true leather, like Heather's sister, I think it's been described. And actually, it wasn't in prime condition for a lot long after this, was it?
No, it probably did another 3 years at good condition, and then it had a slow, unfortunate demise. And just kind of
old carp then, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was old. And
look how scarred it is.
Yeah, it'd been through the mill for sure. And this was a really nice capture for me because it was so close to home. My dad came down and photographed it with a load. And I just remember.
Had you seen big carp before?
No.
Right.
No. And I remember him coming down, and he was like, "Who's doing the photos?" And I went, "Well, mate, he's coming down." He went, "Haven't they got jobs?" I went, "Oh yeah, he's just told them he's going out for some supplies." And he's just coming down to take photographs. And there's a couple of photos that my dad took that are kind of different angles looking in on the proceedings, and they're, I really hold it as a special capture, that one. And that was £40 on the nose, but there was like 7 or 8 people there reading that the weight for me. It is what it's £40. It is what it is, isn't it? And it, at its peak, sort of 44s. I think it went up that big. I think did Steve Falco have it pretty big?
I think so. Yeah.
And
you and Steve treading sort of similar lines at that stage, weren't you? Because he was a Tol Pits angler as well, wasn't he? Yeah. I grew up, one of the true. I think when I said at the start that you ended up catching some of the kind of era-defining carp, and let's face it, some of that's to do with Terry, because he was the biggest single voice at the time. He'd caught that one. Must have felt special to hold a fish that you'd seen pictures of and presumably coveted over the years.
And again, this was another one. I didn't realise how close it was to home until you get a little bit more
because
in that
it was a
circle.
pseudonym, right? Toadless.
Toadless.
Did you crack it, or were you given it?
I was given it.
Yeah,
definitely given it. It was. You just didn't think that would be right on your doorstep.
No.
And I was so lucky with where I lived. At the top of the Colne Valley, the Lee Valley was 20 minutes the other way. It was perfect. But what an incredible fish, and its mouth was immaculate considering how old it was and the snaggy pit it lived in. And it just had the most immaculate flanks, the perfect little tail. And again, at the time, don't think I realised quite
what it was. No, well, why would you? Because you're quite fresh into it still.
Yeah.
Did anyone at uni even care?
I'm pretty sure I'd have kept two
Did you?
very
Well,
separate
you thought you were a
lives.
fisher boy. Like,
But everyone knew.
Yeah.
I remember we'd been out somewhere, and this was on my next, the next fish that I went on to catch. We went out.
Just throw it the other side.
Yeah, got that. We're having a look at the other side of it, and you can see actually, JT, that at the front your hand is already going under the chest a bit, isn't it? There.
Yeah. It's not in peak condition there, is it? But
No.
that was the start of November, so
Quite often they do, as they age, lose
yeah.
sort of muscle mass or condition at the front end, don't they? And
Yeah.
he's still very fat at the back.
Yep. Yeah.
What a great fish! It looks kind of the head is very distinctive as well.
Yeah.
I hesitate to say wise, you know.
I just always remember on the top lip it had a ever such slight little break in the top lip where it obviously been injured at some point, and that was about it. It had just a perfect mouth, and yeah, it's immaculate flanks, and just you couldn't.
That side particularly, right? This side here, there's barely a mark on it.
No, I think I prefer the other side.
Yeah, the battle scarred side. Yeah, because God, if there was just the act of spawning on a lake like that, it's going to shred you, isn't it? Because it was gnarly, flinty gravel plus snags, plus pads, whatever. The next campaign that you mentioned, sorry, I think we slightly interrupted your story about keeping it from people that you were going,
Well, we can get onto that at the end if you want.
Go on, yeah, carry on.
Oh, well, after the next fish I caught, we all went on a night out, and a few people stayed at mine, and I remember some people sleeping on an unhooking mat. That 24,
it was a girl, wasn't it? I've read your story.
24, 36 hours before had the park fish on it.
I'm fairly sure, doesn't the line go something about the second English rose to lay on the mat in
something like that.
Yeah, I love it. So Dark Park was next.
Yes.
I mean, we will pause as and when necessary to examine what you were doing there, but I do want this to feel a bit like a roller coaster through what was, quite a short time. Yeah, really. How did you know that the Dark Park was going to be the next thing?
I didn't. I thought that I was going to do a little bit on Frogmore through the autumn, and then I'd be back there in the spring and the summer and be grinding that one out. I didn't think I was going to catch it that quickly.
Sorry, I mean in terms of choice of venue.
I'd spoken about doing some time the year before with Paul from Angling Intelligence. He'd put me onto it. And
did you have a consultancy in inverted commas at some stage with them?
I did after I'd caught the Marlow one.
So they were quite quick onto you in terms of like sponsored angler.
Yeah, I think I was keen to be on, be associated with them as well. Yeah. They were a nice brand coming through. They had some great products, and I knew Paul. Just felt right.
Steve Pagg, great guy as well.
Yeah, and again another angler who I'd really looked up to, because as I was really getting into it, he's just there carving up
a couple of 50s in a year.
Yep.
Mad. We've got a picture of the Dark Park. This is. I hope I'm not putting anyone's nose. Can we name it now? I don't know. Don't even know what the crack is these days. Let's call it the Dark Park. Somewhere in the home counties. It's a park lake.
Yep.
It's a busy park lake.
Very busy.
It's deep water at one end, dam, and at the other end, shallows and islands.
Really
very pretty. Used for lots of TV stuff, isn't it? You often see it in
Harry Potter.
Yeah, or like police dramas and stuff. Very atmospheric actually. The woods and stuff around there.
Yeah, and again, it had a reputation for being a strange place.
You can see some of the very, really distinctive trees in that one type.
Yeah,
you go back to that. Yeah. If anyone who's been there will know those trees immediately, because it's not. They're almost, are they kind of evergreeny type things, some kind of crazy trees, but super atmospheric. You were obviously aware that it had done like a big one.
Yeah.
What drew you to that fish?
I remember looking at pictures of it, and by the time I fished there, Terry's book had come out, and that was in there, and that just drove it home even more. And I remember walking around there between Christmas and New Year with my friend Tony, and there was loads of carp anglers around there. You could just see them with the Polaroids. Yeah. Stood around looking, and it was one of the buzz ones that had come out from the book. And it
bad timing then, really, or good timing?
I mean, it was the middle of winter. It was pretty crazy time to be starting a campaign, but I fished it through from the start of January. I think through the rest of the year after I caught the toadless, I had a few socials with Bailey, went a few different places, and I don't think I didn't get my teeth into anything. And then I started on this place in January, and I just needed to be out and doing it. I felt like I was on a bit of a roll, and it just felt natural to go onto there. And the fishing was days only, and I did abide by that. it wasn't too far for me to get to, and I just remember baiting, and
You went heavy, didn't you?
I
It's
went
fair to
heavy
say.
on the
Yeah.
bait, which is, we had a really mild, really mild winter that year. I think some of the lakes might have frozen in January, but it was glorious. And this was kind of mid to the end of January, and it was kind of double figure weather, bright sunshine, and it didn't feel like winter. There was a few times I remember sitting on the roots, huddled up, drinking cups of tea because it was pretty bitter, but it just felt right. There was always activity over there. You weren't sat by yourself in the middle of nowhere, kind of fishing. But it was just a lovely place to be. Very, very busy at times. You know, during the morning you'd get people walking around, lots of mums with prams, sort of the model boat club. There was always stuff going on. But it was a funny old place, and I didn't know a huge amount about the backup stock or anything else that was in there. I knew there was a few tench and a few bream. And in this period, I met some lads who had fished it, and they'd caught a few, and I worked out a few bits and pieces. And I actually found out more after I'd been and gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Because actually what ends up happening is, however you've done it, you've achieved a combination that allowed you to catch the big one really quick.
Yeah.
Talk us through the kind of lead up to that session.
So, again, similar to the toadless, I'd found a spot on probably my first session down there, and there was a bridge where the outflow went, and then you had the dam round to the right, and just kind of straight out in front of you there was this beautiful clear spot, and it was at catapult range, so it's probably 30 to 40 yards, and didn't dissect it with a marker float by any means, but it just felt like a nice spot, right depth, and it was really shallow up to the left, and it came down and then dropped down into this deeper water. It just felt like the right place. And so I put some bait in there, and again, at this point, every time I caught a decent fish, you'd get some free bait, and it kind of worked out quite nicely. And I'd saved up, rather than getting some bait, I'd got some base mix, and then BT Darren had sorted me out getting it rolled, and I had a really nice winterized version of the Icelandic red with virtually no kind of preservatives or anything in it.
Oils dropped out, or?
I think there's still a little bit of oil in there, but it was just, you could just smell the cranberry, and after 24 hours it was paste and gone. And it was really, really nice. And I remember just hoofing that in, and there was one distinct time I remember getting down there, and the wind was really strong, and the lake had been shut, the car park was all shut, there was a ranger on the gate telling you couldn't go in. I remember I had loads of bait in the car, and I just drove up and parked in a lay-by and thought, what am I going to do? And I just walked, probably shouldn't have done it, don't do it now. But
Don't do it, kids.
yeah, don't do it. I walked in, and the wind was going everywhere, but it made light work of getting the bait out there.
Over the shoulder.
I think
Flash it
so,
off the back here. Yeah, amazing.
And put loads of bait in, and I became a bit disheartened because I hadn't seen anything. And looking back, it was January, like a low stock, probably less than 15 fish. Or, I mean, not your ideal winter water. And I was getting a bit disheartened because I hadn't seen anything. And this was during the time of the Cemex forum, and there was a guy on there messaging me saying, oh, it's dead, I buried it. And he must have seen me there and knew who I was. And I went down there, and this was the day before I caught it. And I sat there on that bench that Toby showed me, and I'd just got an iPod, and I was sat there just listening to
Whatever happened to them, by the way?
Yeah.
Is it the one with the clicky wheel and all that? Yeah. Old school.
It might not have clicked as you went round. It might have had the touchpad on it, but
Oh, you had one of the good ones then.
I can't. Yeah, it wasn't the all white one. It had a bit of colour to it and a silver back.
God, yeah.
What were you listening to at the time?
Probably what I'm listening to now, some depressing emo music.
No doubt. No wonder you were dooming about the prospects.
So I sat there for ages, just lost in my own thoughts, and I'd look down and one showed.
What?
It was that day. I think I might have taken the photo. It was flat calm, and one showed out there. That was enough for me. So put a load of bait in. I think put 2 kilos in, and then came back the next morning. And I'd really intended to get back there early. You know, be there at first light, rigs out, and I had a headache the next day, and I can't remember if it was self-inflicted or not. But I got down there later, like probably 9:30, like much later than you traditionally want to be down there.
Yeah.
And I got the rods out, and the left-hand rod, which was the one closest to that kind of drop-off, just didn't go well. The wind was really strong, and the lines hooped off and gone off wherever, and I just wasn't happy with it. So I've reeled that one in and redone it.
Yeah.
I was letting the lines settle, and I'd that Christmas I just got an ATT system to go on my Neville's, and I remember really proudly having the little neoprene Realtree case that I clipped on my
lanyard,
my lanyard, and I thought, I'm the man.
You're the boy there.
I'm the boy. Yeah. And I'd gone off to do something, and I was leaning over, and this thing has just belted out in my face, a few beeps.
Yeah.
I look around like that, nothing's going on, gone, and it's just melted off, and it's ripped so quickly that when I've picked up the rod, the wheel's still spinning and it's still beeping in around my neck. And this take just took me up the lake, and I just remember standing there, and because of the fact it was probably 10 o'clock in the week, all of a sudden there was a huge crowd around me. People just gathered round.
Not ideal.
And my net wasn't even set up, and I'm trying to work out, how am I going to set this net up and play this fish, because my net is 10 yards behind me and I'm playing a fish, and there's a dozen people around me, and that got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So eventually I've coaxed one of the dog walkers into bringing the net forward, and they've managed to set it up for me. And during this time, this fish has gone up the lake through the weed, come back down towards me, playing around under the rod tips, and I've seen it roll, and it's a good mirror. And this time I kind of had an inkling which one it's going to be, because the other ones that were anywhere near kind of 30 pound were either fully scaled or commons. And it's come up and it's gone in the net, and it was ironically after it went in the net I almost lost it, because it was almost a canal bank section around there, so you had a foot of concrete section, and I've kind of got the net precariously hanging over, and all this crowd have gathered round to have a look at what's going on. Someone's knocked their boxer in, and this dog's trying to get out while spooking the fish, and the net's gone. And it was just I look back now and I just think, what a crazy place and a crazy time.
Did they hang around for photos, the crowd?
No.
Oh, thank God.
I got it out, and there was a guy there who had an ESP hoodie on, and I recognised straight away he's a fisherman. He fished the boat pool at Horton, and he helped me weigh it, and we put it in a sack, and I tied it off to the fence and called some friends, and they came down. I was due to have a friend come down later for a cup of tea anyway, so he sped up, and they all got there probably about an hour later, did the photos. But then again, there was a new crowd that turned up, and what you don't see behind this photo is one of my friends keeping loads of people out of the shadows, because this was January time, so it's really bright but really low winter sun. And
as a fellow sort of white, really white person, I sympathise with the exposure on your face there. That's tough to expose in low winter sun, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, could well have got sunburn from that.
Magnificent carp, not again like barely a blemish on it. And was that the first time it did 40 pound?
So I met a guy who had caught it the year before at 40, and I met another guy over at Bushy Park a few years later who caught it 40, 41, 42 again that season, so March time.
Okay.
So I'm not sure it was the first time it did 40.
No, sounds like not, in fact. But a fish that was actually kept pretty quiet, wasn't it, on the whole? That one. Yeah, it died more times than most as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, that, and it's the water shots I remember. Pop that water shot up, Toe. Because in my head, I think, having read your story, I'd imagined that there was a dozen people to the left of this shot, but I guess there still were. There was
loads of people. You can imagine getting a fish out that size in a public park.
I mean, people aren't going to believe with their eyes, are they?
No. And I think this was probably just about before camera phones. This was early 2007. I don't remember anyone taking pictures. Although, funny enough, I did meet someone who'd been there. I went back a couple of weeks later just for a walk and met someone who'd seen me taking it, seen me catching it. And I think they might have taken the photo, but it was being on a compact camera.
No one would have believed them otherwise, would they?
No.
Lovely picture. The blues, you know, that kind of the intensity of those winter colours is really evident in that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Were you publishing fish at this stage?
Yeah.
You were?
Yeah.
For the bait? Because obviously having bait is a massive edge, isn't it? And you've used it to the fullest here, haven't you?
Yeah.
How much bait did you put in on the lead up to that?
It'd probably be 15, 20 kilos.
Yeah. So in the winter, you're going for
quite a lot, yeah. But I was publicising them again in Carp Talk or Anglers Mail or whatever we were doing back then, and it's nice to see your picture out there, and you know.
Absolutely. I suppose the flip side of that, you're probably going to get recognised a little bit
Yeah.
when you turn up to places now. You're not going to be incognito anymore.
Nope.
With that fish bagged, though, I mean, this wasn't the end of your little role, was it?
No, it was, yeah. I went on from there on to Marlow, and that was where I said earlier about I'd been there in the autumn when I got a ticket, and I'd seen this fish coming through with that really overslung head, but I didn't know where it was until I'd actually got the ticket for there. And I bought the ticket from the local gun shop that sold the tickets for the lake. And I went in there, got a ticket, and I knew there was a £40 common in there. And that felt, it was really close to home. That was only kind of 10 minutes away. So it felt like a really good place to go. And I started on there as soon as I'd caught that one.
I mean, you're insatiable at this point, aren't you?
Yeah.
Like you're mowing down like prime big carp, but you're not hesitating.
No.
Before going to the next one.
I don't think I could have stopped. It felt so right.
Yeah.
And that hit each time you catch one of those fish is just so difficult to explain, that feeling.
People talk about flow state and stuff like that. It feels like you were like you're rolling with this shit the whole time, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely. It breeds confidence off the back of it. Everything I was doing was working. The bait was working. The rigs were working. I just had to put it in the right spot, and it just felt right. So I carried on.
I mean, when you actually analyse the captures, the last two, you've zeroed in by using what we would now call watercraft, in terms of where a fish is likely to spend some time, but you haven't necessarily seen them. So there's a lot of the kind of, like I say, with the flow state thing, you're using your instincts. Whether instinct is, the culmination of you assimilating lots of data and spitting out, the answer, or whether it is something that's genuinely indefinable, I don't know. But you're able to do it. You're able to capitalise somehow on instinct, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think at this stage here, I wasn't overthinking it either. I just putting bait in the water where you thought the fish might be, and you'd catch one.
Do you think that's the very definition of being in that sort of confident state of
I'd say so, because times after this I've never managed to quite replicate that incredible kind of run of captures, and you go back into your own head and worry about it too much. You overthink things, and you start to put it down to this or down to that, and ultimately I was using a good bait, solid rigs and fishing, and I was in most of these captures I was the only one fishing there, or it was quiet, it was in the winter, and I obviously just hit the windows right, and it worked out very nicely for me.
I remember that winter of 07 name. When you were talking about it, I was kind of dredging around thinking, I remember the winter when it was like 14 degrees for days and days, and it was 07.
Yeah.
Now you've reminded me of it. I mean, exceptional conditions, but you were there to take advantage.
Yeah, right place, right time.
Yeah. And the Marlow thing, once you found out that the common that you'd seen was the common you were in fact fishing for, how did you go about piecing that? Let's talk, before you do that, about even getting to that lake.
Yeah, that was a real challenge, and that probably separated a lot of people from fishing it and not, because I think historically there was good access in there, and then that got taken away, and you had to climb over a bridge, a motorway style bridge, to get over to the lake, and it really made you rethink your kit and everything you had going on there.
That was a good fit. You've even included another steps at both ends, or is it
steps
slopes?
at both ends? No,
right, so you've got to
you've
got to unpack the barrow, I presume, or do you drag it up and drag it down?
So you could bump it down, but you were running the risk of breaking a rod tip.
Yeah.
What I used to do was, the good thing about that barrow was it was all one solid frame.
This is still the chub one.
Still the chub one.
Yeah.
And I used to take the rod and the rods and my rucksack up, and then I'd take the bed off, walk up, and then take the barrow up, and then down the other side it was just 2 trips, one with the rods and the rucksack, and then one just with the barrow bouncing along behind you. But it really made you think about everything, because it was a tough old walk in. And when I caught that fish, I'd been prepping that I was going to be on there for a little bit longer, and I was taking those 5-litre bottles of water from the supermarket over and hiding them down rabbit holes and all sorts of stuff, just to try and cut down on the amount of weight you were taking over. And it was a good thing, because it helped cut the gear down. And that massive mat, that was a mat that basically took the entirety of my boot.
Is that an AI mat?
Yeah.
Is that one
I only took that over when I caught it.
Oh, really?
I wouldn't have taken that the whole time. It was massive.
What, the fish care kit stayed in the van?
So I had a
presumably.
smaller mat,
Okay.
but that mat is gigantic, same size as this table.
I didn't know if you was going to stick it in the net and leave it and then go back and get your kit.
No,
your
I
fish
had
kit.
a small little mat that I unhooked it and put it in a sack, and then when someone turned up, went off. And
So this is this the one that's called the Roach Pit?
That's
at
it,
Marlow?
yeah.
It's a club ticket.
Yep.
What does it look like, and how did you start Turpies? Again, you're romping through this.
Yep.
How do you again knock this over quite quickly?
So it's hard to remember how big it is. It's probably 15 acres, maybe a little bit
So
bigger.
not small at all.
Not small. And it had one big bowl end with a small bay, and then it had a narrower end. There was a kind of a throat, and it came through into a couple of bays with some islands. Then there was a back channel around, again with a high bank. And I think it used to be a bigger lake, and they'd backfilled it. But one bank, the backfill bank, was really steep, no real swims on it, and the margin was very steep, and it went straight off into deep water. And I remember the first couple of days I just plonked myself in the middle and just watched and fished and put some bait out. I remember the first time I was there, it was the first time I'd really given spodding a go. I had a little pocket rocket and was wanging it out there trying to get some bait out beyond the weed, because it was really weedy close in, or kind of low lying weed. And because it was cold, not that cold that winter, the weed was still there. I was fishing beyond it into this kind of silty bowl out in the middle. And I remember thinking, this is where I'm going to catch it from. You know, I found this spot. It's just like the other two. I'm going to carry on here, and I'm going to catch it from here. And I just fished around. So I kind of started at the beginning of February. Again, not a great time to be starting, but within probably a couple of weeks, I'd seen most of the stock. Once up in I don't know which end it'd be, probably the westerly end. And they were there in the morning when the sun came up in the snags, and you'd see them around there. And I came close a few times, fed them some corn and fished for them. Then I found them the other end, probably a little bit later on, up the furthest end, the completely opposite end to where I'd seen them before. And then there was one day I was doing there, and because I was in my first year of my degree, it's pretty easy going in terms of how many hours you're having to do at lectures and seminars. And you could I remember I had one day where I didn't have anything on. So I think it was a Wednesday. So I could do a Tuesday, Wednesday, and then go back either first thing Thursday or go back Wednesday evening. So I was getting a night in the week and then getting a couple of nights if I wanted it at the weekend. And I just carried on, persistence, and just cracked on. And then I saw one show around to the right of the main kind of point that looked over the main body of water. And I investigated that with the marker float, found a nice little gravel seam.
Oh, so this is a sea change in terms of what you're presenting over then.
Yeah. Although I didn't catch anything off the gravel.
Okay, carry on then. Yeah.
Again, textbook spot. And
Yeah.
I'd seen a fish show there. I thought, this is where we're going to catch it from. Nope. Put quite a bit of bait in, a couple of kilos around that area, and fished in that area, and just got relentlessly pummeled by the ducks or the coots, one of the two. Just they'd probably eaten most of
You
the
putting
last
out whole
one.
boilies?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because at that stage, I was really a boilie guy. On Tol Pits, I'd played around with maize and I played around with bits and pieces, but caught all my best fish on boilies. So with the way I was going, I was going to carry on with the boilies because it was working. And I'd caught a few, or one or two on Tol Pits and on the chod rig, and it was in its infancy in that stage. You know, it was well written about, but didn't seem like that many people were using it. And I'd had a little go and tied some up, but not caught any big ones on them. And that spot just round to the right there, I fished a night on it and didn't catch anything. I think I'd fished up the other end where I'd seen the fish in the kind of back bay. I'd fished up there, and James Davies, who was like the ultimate big carp king at that stage, I thought. He'd caught so many good ones, and he was up there. So I fished next to him.
Where you first met him? Was your friends, aren't you?
Yeah, that's where I first met him, on there. And he'd just come off the back of catching everything out of Raisbury and then everything out of Pingewood. And before that, you know, he'd been catching good fish out of Yateley and around that area for a while. And he had, to digress, his modus operandi was just to turn up, find a spot in the middle, boilies, and fish it every weekend until he caught it. And he caught so many good ones, and he just relentlessly went through them. And anyway, I'd fished up this far end with James, and we'd seen a few fish up there, and nothing had happened, and the wind swung round. It felt wrong, so we moved further down. I moved where I'd seen the fish show the week before on that bait. James was to my left fishing the open water, and it was the night the clocks went back, went forward, whichever way it is in the spring.
Forward. Yeah.
So we'd been up quite late that night and went through to the next day, and that evening was when I'd got absolutely hammered by the ducks. The rigs had barely been in there 10-15 minutes and I was getting picked up, so I'd reeled in another rod, put a chod rig on, and just put it just off that spot. And then probably late morning, midday the next day, had a really twitchy take on that middle rod, pulled in, came in. I'd caught a few tench, or a tench, or maybe, yeah, I'd caught some tench, but they were really small and they didn't fight. They just came in the weed. And I played this fish in, and I thought it was a tench. And it was only when I got in really close that I saw this little peck come out of the water like that. And on its, I think it'd be its left hand, one of the sides, it had got a snap peck. So it almost had like a little salute. So it had a peck like that.
Yeah.
And I just remember it coming up in the water and just seeing that peck stick out. And I thought, oh, I know what this one is. Jumped straight in the water, went out, and barely a fight to talk of. It went straight in the net.
Just how you want it.
Just how you want it. I mean, it beat me up on the bank. Didn't sit still. I've got some video footage of it, and there's barely 10 seconds goes by where it's not curling up. Or
so James is literally snatching off stills as and when it's still. And that's it.
That was it. It did not sit still.
I mean, it looks, the picture of Serenity here.
It wasn't.
And look at the way it stands out against the brambles. Incredible, vivid sort of winter condition.
Yeah, that was kind of the end of March I caught that one. And again, first capture from the lake, which meant toadless was my second capture because I'd had a common before that. The black park was the first capture from the lake, and that was the first capture from the lake other than tench.
I mean, notable this fish for its head.
Yep.
You don't see many carp like that.
No, incredible. It's tiny little mouth when you look at that head all slung over like that. And I remember popping out the chod rig, and I was using really long chods. They were probably about that kind of size, and the swivel was touching the bottom lip. And
you wanted that,
yeah. You really had to put. You can see the mouth a bit better in that shot there, Tobes. Really overslung, and that fish was never falling off. I mean, it barely fought, but
short fish. Looking at that,
yeah, really stumpy,
super wide. So it's another 40, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was 42.10.
So like angling intelligence now are like,
yeah,
who is this guy? He's just knocking over 40s for fun.
I remember Paul had told me that he would give me a consultancy deal if I caught that fish before Rick Harrison,
right? Because
Rick was fishing there at the same time, and I did.
And you've gone for both mats in that picture in the end.
Yep.
You've gone for your light mat and the bigger one underneath. Definitely. Yeah, mega. I love the colours of it. Are fantastic.
Really, really nice.
Ever so slight bit of maybe in the pack there's that sort of pearlescent, ghosty sort of in the mix somewhere, isn't there? But
it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a mad old fish, and yeah, very, very nice one. I saw that in the water a few times in the autumn before, and then I saw it subsequently after I caught it. I actually saw it taking a floater. It must have come up.
Defy physics, that really.
It came up like a Polaris missile and just kind of slurped at it. It was such a bizarre kind of shaped mouth, and it got quite big after I caught it.
46 or something.
Yeah, it got bigger and then passed away a couple of years later.
Again, your timing's good.
Yeah,
I think we talked about timing,
and that was sheer luck.
Right.
You know, there was no, I'm going to catch this one here and do this. It was all just a bit of a, where am I going to go now?
Just to recap, the chod, you put that out off the side of the gravel spot that you've been baiting.
Yep.
Okay.
I probably only baited that spot twice.
And do you think the fish got any of the boilies that you put out there?
With the rate the birds picked me up the day before, probably not. But I was spreading bait really wide. There was no accuracy. There was no on a dustbin lid there. I was scattering it.
Which you've kind of done for the previous two captures as well. Looking back, do you think there's a significance to the way you fished then?
Yeah, it's a really effective way of picking out fish. You've got them moving if they are feeding, and it's a forgiving way of fishing. I'm not a technical angler in terms of if you ask me to put 3 on a dinner plate at a certain range. I've worked hard in the subsequent years to improve my technicality, but it's a forgiving way of fishing. If some boilies go wide, or if you're using a throwing stick and they're going all over the place, it's a forgiving way of fishing. And that works quite well, especially with a rough and ready.
I mean, you know, certainly people have said this is a big fish method as well, and you're kind of proving it there.
Yeah.
Did you at any stage, let's think about maybe Raisbury, somewhere where all of a sudden you've got access to a boat? Do you just try and change your fishing entirely, and is that to its detriment?
I didn't to start with. The first fish I caught out of there, I was boating across into No Carp Bay, kind of coming out from behind the sailing club, and I saw some fish, or I saw a fish boom out, went over to the rough area, had a little 6-foot rod with a bit of braid, bonk, 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 found a presentable area, put an H-block on it, came back single bottom bait and spread bait all over, because I couldn't see the bottom. Maybe if I'd have seen there's a tiny little spot like that, I'd have tried to place it more carefully, but certainly to start with, I just went with the tactics that were working for me.
So, I mean, obviously we've skipped the inception of your Raisbury campaign. How much did the time you spent with James influence your next move?
100%.
Yeah.
So on Marlow, I'd met Beadle and James Davies, and those two had been, not the year before, but 2 years before, they'd caught everything out of there. You know, Beadle had caught Mary's mate Malins and King Fungus in 48 hours. I think he had Mary's mate and Malins in the net at the same time. James had caught Pug, Malins and Mary's mate, and then a load of the other ones. And speaking to those guys, you just can't help but be inspired. And it's somewhere, again, you've grown up reading about. And again, if I was out on my depth going on to Tol Pits, going on to Raisbury.
You've got a cool little boat though.
Yeah.
You can see from the picture that Toby just put up.
Yep.
Camoed up, barely looks big enough to sort of for you and your kit. But you're afloat for the first time?
That was the first time. I bought that boat from Simon, and it had been up at Fen Drayton for a few years. And it was heavy, really heavy, that boat. It was fiberglass, and me and my dad had mended up the transom at the back, and it was, I don't even know how much fiberglass we put on there. It was a tank of a boat.
And you're driving it up there every time, or you're leaving it there?
So I was leaving it there to start with, and then it got stolen and got joy-ridden around the lake. And I managed to get it back, and there wasn't a huge amount of damage done to it. And in retrospect now, I know that you can see that silver ring on the front that was held on with 4 screws. They just kicked it and that came off.
Live and learn sort of thing.
So at the start, that boat was stashed up with a bit of camo net over it, and I was just coming down and doing it. And then it was on the island for a bit, and I had an absolute death trap of a dinghy I used to get onto the island.
God, that's ag, isn't it? You have to have time.
Yeah.
If just to get to your boat, you've got to use a boat.
Well, you can see on one of the photos, I think there's a photo of my old car, and there was no way I was getting the boat on there.
Right. So you need to work out a way.
Yeah, and I did get an estate later on that year, and I was able to get the boat onto the roof myself by a series of grunts and manhandling. I did scratch the roof of the car quite badly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's the first car,
the blue
isn't
Harker.
That is a terrible fishing car.
Terrible.
Like, they don't come much worse.
It's a 3-door as well.
I'm getting strong in-betweener vibes from a car like that. Yeah.
But it never let me down, did me proud.
No, they're always the best ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
Then we've got the other one as well. Give me 2 seconds.
Fill it up with a tank of fuel for £30, I think it was at the time.
Well, yeah. I mean, which can't be underestimated, because Raisbury's a bit more of a jaunt. Not a lot more, but a bit more, isn't it?
I think it was 30 miles, and then that was my
Astra.
Astra.
An Astra as well. I mean, the carp angler's car, right?
Yeah, strong choice.
How long did it take you to get the boat on that roof then?
You don't want to know, Toby.
No, I was going to go on,
so
honestly. But...
So you'd have to reverse up to where your boat was, and your boat would be lying the other way. You push the boat up, lean it on the car, put an unhooking mat above the boot, and then pick it up and slide it on. And it had 2 really prominent bolts right at the very front, and that scratched out.
I'd really like to see pictures of the top of that car. I bet it was ruined, isn't it?
It wasn't great. I sold it to Kingy at Yateley. He had that car.
Oh, Kingy, legend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Carpy boat, but actually probably pretty shit in the end. The weight of it.
It wasn't great. But it was nice and stable, and it was quite deep bodied and flat on the bottom. And I didn't know any better. Before this, I'd only ever used small inflatables, or I'd been on a work party boat or getting a fish out of a snag, and it was all a massive baptism of fire. But the freedom that came with it, being out in the middle of the lake, you've got your barrow and your fish spotting rolled into one.
Was this the summer immediately following the capture of the Marlow?
Yep. So this was 2007.
So you summer between first year and second year at uni, you've gone to Raisbury.
Yeah. The summer before I was on Tol Pits, and then I went straight on to Raisbury, and what a place.
It's fair to say this has all happened this has happened pretty quick for you, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Any kind of feelings of disbelief that you've gone from, it wasn't that long ago that you'd caught your first big one, and now you've got a string of them, and you must have been your national news, really.
I don't know. I at the time it just felt I was just rolling with it. It was such an enjoyable time. I lived and breathed carp fishing, and it was my everything.
Would it be fair to say that Raisbury, was never going to be as easy as those other lakes, in the sense that instinct's only going to get you so far on a lake like that?
Yeah, and instinct on those smaller lakes, if you're wrong, it's a couple of 100 meters, whereas you could be in an almost different lake if you got it wrong over there. But again, I had the time. I was off uni for the summer, and
your parents had no expectation that you were going to go and get work. You just went fishing, or
I think you'd have to ask them.
Yeah.
Well,
whatever expectations were, you were about to disappoint them. So,
to be honest, it's such a bizarre thing looking back, because carp fishing for a period was all that mattered to me. It was so important, and I sacrificed friendships, relationships, jobs probably, and all sorts just to go and do this, and I don't regret it. It was
a great shot, this, by the way.
Yeah.
Who took these shots?
Bales.
Was it? But Ian didn't have a ticket. He
No,
just came over
he used to come over after work. This was when he was in the tackle shop. He'd come down after work and sit, and
it's actually a fabulous shot.
Yeah. Should have levelled it straight
Where is that? Well, yeah. You can crop that, can't we?
That's the drive-in dredger looking out towards the bonsai tree and Route Nightmare.
I love the plane, top left as well. Kind of a little bit of mist on the water, or sort of May fluff or something.
This would have been probably June, July time, so it was hot, and I think we'd had a bit of rain, and it was just it was a very atmospheric place. It was
giant trees, giant snags, kind of. Well, probably the ultimate carp lake at the time in the country.
Yeah. And again, it was in its state of flux at that time, because it was 2007. I don't think Mary's mate had already died, and me and James buried what we think was Mary's mate in the North Lake, and Malins didn't come out again, and the pug didn't come out again.
You kind of missed it, didn't you?
Kind of missed it, and James and the other guys who fished it in 2005. They hit it absolutely smack on. But what an incredible place to be and learn. Just, there was not that many people there, and those that were proper anglers.
And that's because these fish had started to drop off.
Yeah.
Fungus the main target for you, or just anything?
At that point, I was just enjoying fishing there. I'd have loved to have gone there and caught malins. And I remember at the time thinking, no one ever found malins dead. I remember thinking it could still be here. And there was a couple of times where I'd see a fish in the swimming pool, and I'd be like, that's malins. It's got to be malins. It's got white tips of tail. And I think it was probably confirmation bias of me seeing what I wanted to see at the time. But it was just exciting, really exciting fishing. And from a boat adds a new dimension. There's not many places then or now that you can use that and do that kind of style of fishing. And you learn more from doing that than you do by anything else. You can equally fry your head very, very easily.
Can I ask, at this point, you're in that eternal summer of kind of youth, like it's going to go on forever. You are going to be a carp angler forever, and you think probably I'm going to roll on one campaign after another.
Yep.
The real world must have seemed a long way away at that point.
Yeah.
And you can just fish.
I was
all
Peter
summer.
Pan.
Yeah.
I lived on there, and I'd do kind of 5 nights on the bounce, and I was better prepared now. In terms of my kit was good. I had a better bed chair, had sleeping bags that were fit for purpose. But even so, I'd have fresh food for kind of 2-3 days. And then after that, you'd be living on tins and UHT. And it was just a great adventure.
In a way, your generation of anglers, you'd read all the stories, so it added almost a different. You weren't pioneering these lakes, but you were living the dream that you'd read about.
Yeah, and we didn't have, like, my mobile phone had 3 batteries. I could take them out. When one died, I could put a new battery in. I didn't have the internet or WAP or whatever it was at that time. I used to call up my mum.
Showing your age here now, mate.
I used to call up my mum and ask her about what the weather was doing and if the air pressure was dropping, because I'd print it out before I went, so I'd have a printout of that week's weather.
It's amazing. I mean, this wasn't that long ago in relative terms.
There'll be some people listening to this, right, that will blow their minds that you should be able to take a battery out of the phone.
Yeah,
that's what you've just
free
done.
batteries. Yeah. my selective criteria for my new phones would be, do my old batteries fit in it?
So at this stage, your mum and dad, do they feel like they've lost? Because obviously, you know, you've gone to university. They probably thought you were going to knuckle down at some point, and actually you've done the opposite.
Yeah, I've never really asked them, to be honest. I just... You know, I never really asked them. And at the time, I probably was very selfish in terms of, I just wanted to go fishing as much as I could, whenever I could. Everything I did revolved around going fishing.
And you're immersed, aren't you? You're fully immersed. You've met James Davies and Beadle, both of whom are on the scene.
Yep.
And
Big
obsessive as well.
Yep.
You know, so that everywhere you look, there's the same people reflecting the same sort of obsession back at you as well. So, you know, you might well think that you're doing exactly the same as other people, when the reality is that you're already doing fishing that is a long way from what most people were doing, even at the time.
Yeah, just I was surrounded by like-minded people, and we were doing like-minded things and probably pushing each other on to do more and more different things. And it didn't feel unachievable after I'd had a really good, successful winter. It just felt like
I mean, that's an understatement of the decade. A really successful winter where you've caught, you know, two incredible carp. What did you learn on Raisbury? Because like I said at the start, it's probably not going to be a water you can knock over.
No. So I got off. I caught one on my first morning.
Which is, I mean, why wouldn't you at the minute? The way things are. Yeah.
It was pretty incredible, really. And bearing in mind, I was probably like Bambi on ice in the boat. I came round. Yeah,
big guy in a boat. Small boat.
Came round the corner round the driving dredger where that photo was taken. There was a guy in there, and I picked up one of his lines on my outboard.
Turner.
Didn't wrap him up, but I didn't get it up quite as much. He had a bip bip. I remember I just wanted the world to swallow me.
Yes.
I wanted to go home and cry, and I boated on through, said my sorries, and so sorry whoever you were. Can't remember who it was, but I felt really bad. I still feel bad. And I was driving in this morning thinking about that, and I felt really bad.
Oh, it's the worst. You don't want that to happen, do you?
I mean, luckily I didn't wrap him up or do anything incredibly bad. But anyway, I boated on through, and that was when I saw that fish show. Went through, found a rough spot, donked around, and I remember getting absolutely soaked getting 4 rods out there. And putting rods out with a boat is easy and very hard at the same time. And I had a really nice waterproof jacket that I'd bought in trendy Realtree at the time. And my top half was bone dry and my legs were absolutely soaked. And I was so unprepared. I think I had like 1 set of trousers and 1 set of shorts. And my trousers were soaked to the core. So they're hanging up in the spokes of the brolly. And the next morning, I can't remember if I saw anything or not, but I had a ripping take on the left-hand rod. The first rod I've ever dropped from a boat, and I've had a take. And I've gone out in the boat in my pants and my t-shirt and my life jacket. You've got these great plans of when the rod goes, you're going to pick it up, lean into it, other hand, get your life jacket, put it on really carefully. Just went completely up the wall. I've managed to get the boat underneath the other 3 rods because the boat was on the right hand side of the swim, so I had to go right under the rods, nearly crouching down, grab the other rod, gone out there. And when I got out there, I don't remember much of the fight. I just remember thinking, I'm playing a fish on Raisbury in my pants, and there's some guys over there that can probably see me, and there's someone getting out of his car over here. You can probably see. I'm just thinking,
what? That'd be a proud moment. Proud moment.
Now I'd be proud, but back then I was a shy little kind of lad. I don't think I was that mature. I think I wouldn't have said boo to a goose. I didn't want to get in anyone's way. I just wanted to come and do a bit of fishing. And you're like the centre stage all of a sudden. Yeah, I probably wasn't. They probably didn't even notice I was playing a fish, but the guy in the hooligan swim who was unloading his kit, he did. And I've netted it, and it was a nice common, and it was 31 pounder, and that was on my first morning. I just remember thinking, how is this happened? Like, it's madness.
Well, it's
isn't
interesting that you were surprised, because you've come off a biblical run of carp.
Yeah, but you're going on to, even just for size alone, that place is intimidating. And it's a big 120 acres because it's so broken up. And that one now is the one they now call Red October.
Okay.
Now, I don't know at the time if it had that name, Red October, or not, but that's the one that's now called Red October. But what a lovely fish that one was.
Absolutely. I mean, the sort of Raisbury's done quite a few big commons, hasn't it? In the end,
Yeah.
A lot of them sort of, I'd imagine, same cohort as that one.
Yeah.
31 pound. That's a big carp.
Yeah.
Albeit, again, you're starting to make them look pretty small. It has to be said. The curse of the bigger. I'm in the same boat. It's impossible for us to make fish look anything approaching big, isn't it? But that is a great fish. Slightly pale. Does that, the fact you couldn't see the bottom, does that mean that there was an algae bloom at the time? Or?
Yeah, so this would have been mid-June, and the water clarity, I can't remember exactly how deep you could see, but you could see a bit. And I caught this one and caught another one, and then the visibility virtually went, and you were fishing blind even with the boat. It's probably a bit of a hindrance at that point, because you can't just cast out and see what's going on. But the visibility dropped out, and I really scratched right through July and August, didn't catch anything. And then probably September time, the visibility came back, and then I had a few more chances at the end, right before I was going back to university. And yeah, it was eye-opening for many, many reasons. But actually, fishing from the boat during that algae was probably the wrong thing to do. And everyone, hindsight's 20/20. But at the time, you had the boat, and I was going to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah.
The technology-wise, you're using bigger leads, no doubt. But are you lowering down the same rigs that you've kind of been using on and off for years now?
Yeah, absolutely. Size 10 long shanks.
Yeah.
Which feel, now thinking back on, I just go, how did I do that? But they never, I think I lost one out of, I think I had six fish out of Raisbury and lost one. I'll take those odds.
Absolutely. And it just shows that it proves that was a rig that was suitable.
Yeah.
Albeit, size 10, there's a lot of hook for a size 10 there, isn't there? As hooks go. Was this in the period that you reverted to the blowback, or are you back onto the silicon round?
No, I was using the blowback on
okay. Still boilie fishing when you can?
Still boilie fishing.
Right, so a handful of boilies over the top, or crumbed, or just...
Exactly what I've been doing from the bank, I was doing from the boat.
I love how consistent, you haven't had to think about anything, have you there? You've just gone straight in on what works.
Yeah, I'd been doing really well on it. Why I didn't see a need to change it. And then later on, when the visibility came back and I was placing them onto smaller spots, I was still using boilies. And I was still scattering bait around, even though you could see a clear spot down there. I'd be scattering bait all around it.
Which is fair to say, I don't imagine everyone was on there at the time.
No, I don't think so. But I didn't really stop and ask anyone.
No, were you seeing anybody on your sessions?
Yeah, I was seeing a few people there. Raisbury Ben and a few other guys on there. There was some northern lads, Adam and Liam. And looking back now, I'd fish from Sunday through to Saturday. Sometimes I'd fish whenever the conditions were right, or if I didn't have anything else to be doing, I'd just be fishing.
That's a lot of fishing.
Yeah. There was a period where I think definitely around this time, but for a few years, where I did more nights on the bank than I did at home.
I love that. I mean,
or if it wasn't more, it was very close.
What kind of toll is that taking on you? Because that's graft.
Yeah.
People might imagine that's living the dream, but for me, I'm shattered after 2 nights, mate.
I didn't notice it at the time, but I mean, I've got a bad knee now. The doctor reckons from having my knees up and sitting in uncomfortable positions for too long, and probably tree climbing and other stuff. And just I've missed out on people's birthdays, important celebrations, just to selfishly go fishing. Even when conditions were naff, it was all that seemed to matter.
And was this all coming from within, or are you just talking to people all the time about your obsessions, and theirs too?
Yeah, I was just surrounded, again, as we said earlier, like-minded people. Just felt like the thing I wanted to be doing and driving on. And I felt like it was going to last forever, but I knew it wouldn't.
But you bury that deep down.
You bury it and just make hay while the sun shines.
And it's fair, we're going to come on to talk about later on about how life caught up.
Yeah.
And you're still relatively young, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of fishing in what was quite a young life at that point.
Mm-hmm.
What are the particular highlights from Raisbury that we can talk about that stand out when you look back, beyond the capture of Red October, of course?
I caught Baby Mary, which was a really nice one. I don't know if it was an original or a fungus. I don't know where it came from.
It had a tumour at the time.
It did, yeah.
Maybe yours was maybe even towards the end of its life, wasn't it?
Yeah, you can see it down in the...
I mean, that is a crazy little carp.
Yeah, it's mad.
I mean, you can see why people thought it looked like, the head end certainly is very Mary-esque, but obviously it was a hell of a lot smaller.
Yeah, I mean, that was a 30-pounder, but I don't know how much was related to the growth that was going on. That photo doesn't do it justice, but it had
It looks like 18 pound.
Yeah, it had a proper big kind of growth down in its belly. It did go on for another year or so before it died. So there was
looks male, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah.
The huge spoon-like pecs and big tail.
Incredible fight off that one.
Was it?
Yeah, I remember the take was actually one of the most impressive things I think about that fight, because I was in the drive-in dredger swim, and so not wanting to have my lines taken out like I'd done to someone else, I had my rod tips really, really far down and the butts up, but I didn't have my Nevilles at this point. I think I'd snapped one of them or something, so I borrowed a set of alarms or some old Micron-E's or something. There was volume control on and off, and that was it. And it just went beep, beep, beep. Just look round, and the rod is being held by the butt, pointing a different angle off. And as I've looked at it, it slid, and then just by the reel caught on the right hand rod, which has saved it from going off
straight in.
Yeah.
This is on mono as well.
This was on mono,
Yeah.
but I was fishing tight because I was fishing out. So where that photo of me in the boat was, that was like a transit point for the fish going between the north and the south, or the Dredger Bay and the south. And there was a hump in the middle, or a bar, and I had a hinge rig on that, and that one came along and pulled it, and off it went. But the take, I came so close to losing a rod.
And the battle continued in a similar vein.
Yeah, like nailing jelly to a wall.
So you take to the boat straight away?
I got it under control and then out in the boat. And again, that was only the second fish I'd ever properly played from a boat. So it's so difficult when you're getting spun around, and it is easier in that kind of heavier boat than it has. I mean, I've played fish in inflatables and stuff since, and again, that's easier, but at the time it was impossible.
That's still the boat pre being stolen and joy ridden around?
I got it back and carried on using it.
Okay. Where did you find it when it was?
It was someone else. So the guy who did my photos of that common, he'd found some guys boating around it, knew it was a carp angler's boat, commandeered it, kicked them out, and then dragged it up and stashed it somewhere for me. So I did get it back, and then it had some remedial repair work and carried on.
What happened to it in the end then?
I've still got it.
Have you?
Although it is in a lockup of a fishing club somewhere, so I do probably need to get it back.
We won't mention the fishery.
I'll make that call afterwards.
I'm sure you got me 2 boats from a lockup in a fishing club somewhere.
Yeah.
One of which is still in use.
Is it?
Yeah, the other one's a pond in my father-in-law's.
Those boats were all going off to the wreckers, so it's nice to know
they're good boats. But your one, nice to know it's still out there, mate.
I hope so. I haven't seen it in about
someone's
3-4
giving it away
years.
like you did.
It had holes in it because it was going to be a planter.
Yeah, that's what I mean. My father-in-law's is a pond with sticklebacks now. Nice. It was a tiny one. I don't know if you remember, but the 2 boats
it fitted in the other boat.
Yeah, something like that. It was absolutely tiny, and God knows what I was ever going to do with it. But yeah, so Baby Mary, cool carp to have caught.
Yep.
Did you have any up close and personal with the fungus? I mean, which is the big one in the lake at the time?
I saw that one a few times. Once in the railway lake off of the island in the snags where it lived, and you'd see it all the time. And another time I had it must have been in the summer at some point. I can't remember if the viz was really good or really bad, but enough to know it was that fish. And I was pulled up in the weed between Bryant's Point and the football pitch, and it was just cruising round, just taking it easy. And I mean, at that point it had not done a huge amount of captures. That was pre Phil Bunyan's capture. So it'd been out. I can't remember who the last person to catch it would have been.
I feel like John Holt maybe had it, £36 or something like that.
No, Beadle had it since, and I think it had been out again. But it was like an arrow, like really narrow at the nose and then wide at the back, and you could see that scar on its left-hand flank. and just
and an enigma as well, because
Yeah.
to this day, you know, it was never found dead. I mean, it's likely to be long gone, but it lived its life as an enigma, didn't it? Pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, I remember speaking to guys who did far more time on there than me, and who targeted it, and some of the stories they had about it were just incredible. It just a lore unto itself.
Do you remember the picture Adam Penning had of it on the wall?
Mhm.
Sat amongst a load of boilies in the
Yeah.
snags. I mean, it sounded like a fish that lived in the snags.
Mhm.
Do you think that's why it was tough to catch, or should it in fact be that as soon as it leaves its little home, it's easy to catch?
It never got caught out of the same place more than once, did it?
Right.
It got caught from a few different places, and I remember seeing the footage of Phil Adnett with it. Was it on Carp Wise? The old.
Not seen that, so
I remember having a DVD or something, and there was like a 10-second clip of King Fungus with Phil, and just watching that over and over and over again. But I never went on there obsessed with trying to catch that one, and I learned a lot about that fish and its bizarre ways probably after I left. I just went on there and enjoyed my fishing and just bumbled around and just.
Yeah, I mean, it always adds a theatrical element if there's a big one in the background, doesn't it? As well.
Oh yeah.
You know, it could be the next thing. You never know.
If I'm honest, at that stage, if there wasn't a big one in there, I probably wouldn't have been there. If you're just fishing for 30s, I liked having that 40 to go at because it was the benchmark or the kind of weight that you wanted to hit.
And how did you decide that you weren't in fact going to carry on for that fish?
So I caught well into September, and I had a couple of little kind of Suttony stockies, and
You had what is now the long Sutton, didn't you? In fact,
yeah, and
So now the big one, really, isn't it? I
yeah,
guess, or
that's
one of them.
labelled as LS, I think.
Which
and-
I think it's right up there now in
Yeah.
terms of carp that are out there.
It's lovely, and at the time I didn't know what it was from. I wasn't sure.
Look at it.
The mad colours on that.
I mean, I'm colourblind, right? What colour is that carp? Someone should. It's set off by the deep tones of your hair as well, JT. There's
Looks very like charcoal kind of.
Is there a bit of purple to it as
Yeah,
well?
there
Tones?
is,
Purpley
yeah.
blue. And I caught that one. I can't remember which one I caught first, but the one that's now known as single scale illegal.
Yeah.
I caught that one, and then caught that one.
Got that on here. I'll put that up next.
I mean, I'm still. To be honest, I haven't seen that picture for a while. I'm still stunned by. You know, maybe we'll put this out on Instagram, Tobes, or something.
Yeah.
Certainly, people on YouTube will be seeing it already. But it is an incredible colour, and it's remained that way actually, hasn't it, to this day?
Yeah, and I had no idea where they'd turned up from, but I caught two of them in a couple of weeks, and I had two little Suttons at the same time, and I was really rocking. And then I went back to uni, and I didn't fish over the winter like I did.
Were they moving in
Before.
packs? Do you think these fish?
Not sure. I found an area in the North Lake where.
That's on the other side of the Long Sutton. I mean, if someone had said to you at this stage that was going to be called the Long Sutton, you probably wouldn't have believed them. But
No.
looking at it here, it's actually quite short.
Yeah.
I can't get over how dark that
That's
is.
unbelievable,
Like I've
James, isn't
seen
it?
a fair few carpy pictures on this show now, but I've never seen one like it looks black.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but with a slaty, purpley
Yeah.
edge to it as well.
Very special.
I mean, I
fish.
think it's likely to be
Mad
over
looking
£50 now.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was £20 an ounces there.
And
And then I had
your photos are good by now, aren't they? Look, you've got great
Simon
colours
Maris,
in there. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Simon Maris on the camera for that one. He came
Caught a
down
few
from
in his
Tol
time,
Pits.
hasn't he, off site, yeah?
Great angler.
Yeah.
And then Bales did the shots of single scale illegal.
What's the story behind the illegals? Do you know?
I have no idea.
But let's see the first one, Tobes. There's that one. That's cool.
I don't know what the story is behind them. That
is another Sutton though, right?
I think so.
It must be. It looks a lot like the fish that have gone on to be quite big in Kingsmead, doesn't it? The sort of shape of it, and
you heard bits and pieces. I knew they'd put a few little ones on,
yeah.
put a few little ones in, but I don't know where they came from or any of the story behind them. But when I caught the first one, which was I'm pretty sure I caught the Long Sutton first, and I remember, or maybe that one, I remember just thinking, is this one of the odd uns? Is this?
Yep.
You know, I didn't have a phone camera to compare pictures or anything. I went back and looked through all the pictures I got, couldn't find it, messaged a few people, they didn't know where it's from, and just a bizarre.
You're able to send picture messages at this stage, like
Yeah.
between anglers. They're
I
probably
think that was on Cemex forum again.
Okay.
In the private messages.
got you. And who were the sort of faces that you were talking to at that stage, on private message? Let's say who would know? Who'd probably been there before you?
Yeah. I might have I can't remember who I messaged, but they were mad old.
The hair is, talk me through the hair situation here, because most people would probably shave that off if you were going to fish full time, but you've gone for like quite a wild barnet at this stage.
Kind of gone through my emo stage, and it was just a bit wild, and it wasn't the most.
There's a lot of it.
Yeah, it's thick hair as well.
Deep flame red at that stage as well.
Think homeless Ed Sheeran. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It just,
Well said.
I don't know. It just was my hair.
JT, I just want to say, mate, you look good in a beard now. That's all I'm going to say.
Thanks, Topes.
Yeah. And at that stage, you wouldn't have thought that beard was possible.
No,
I
wasn't shaving with any kind of regularity
baby-faced kind of.
Yeah.
Every time you got a bite on there must have been excitement.
Huge excitement. Yeah. It was just not knowing what was on the end, and the work that had led to, particularly at the end there, where I'd had 2 months of hard fishing from, I caught those first 2 fish in June, and then July, August with nothing. But doing that time, it's not like I'd done 1 or 2 nights. I'd done a lot of time when you get that first bite, it is touch and go, and you just want to get them in.
Yeah, of course,
it's exciting, and you can enjoy it afterwards, but at the time you just want to land them.
Do you think on reflection you were unlucky?
I don't know.
Is that such? I mean, it sounds bad, but these are effectively in inverted commas against stockies, aren't they? But
yeah.
Were there any originals in the lake at the time? You got the commons, presumably.
Yeah, you had the commons.
The shadow of the pug there, maybe somewhere.
Yeah, and it just, I don't know. I'd never felt unlucky. I really enjoyed it, and again, I always felt I'd go back on there. I thought, right, I'm going to come back in a few years when I've got a little bit more kind of behind me, and some of these other fish are pushed through, and king fungus will still be there, and everything will be the same. I'm still going to be able to do 5 nights, and I'll get a job and I'll do 2 nights a week on there, or I'll come back after I've fished here or there. But it just never kind of happened. I went back the next year to answer one of your questions from earlier, and I remember my first or second session back, I just had the nightmare of all sessions. I was going along in the boat, and I leant back and knocked my marker rod, or my little donking rod, out. I snapped a rod tip, and just everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and I just left there with my tail between my legs. And I fully intended to go back, and just the way it rolls and the way everything goes, I just never did. But I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I feel unlucky. I don't look back and feel unlucky. I look back and just think how lucky I was to have that freedom and fish a place like that at that time. It just, I have no regrets on that.
So with the line drawn under Raisbury, at least for the short term, actually what turned out to be the long term, you've gone back to uni in September. Does stuff start to get real at this point? Are you now committing to this education, to academia, or are thoughts on the next campaign?
Thoughts were never far away from the next campaign, but with a lot of things that I do in my life, I am all or nothing, and wasn't about to, even looking back, the amount we paid for student loan compared with now is virtually nothing. But I wasn't about to let that go, and I'd got through the first year but done a lot of fishing, and then that next year, after I left Raisbury, I don't think I fished properly through until next summer, when I went back and had that abysmal session of snapping a rod tip and all of that. So I did get my nose down in the end, and then the year after the same, I didn't fish other than in reading weeks. I did actually concentrate, and ended up with a 2-1 honours, which my parents were most pleased about.
That's not bad considering how much fishing you did, though, didn't it? Really?
No, and I know we're going off tangent. I found that when I was at school, I never saw my full potential because the learning style wasn't for me. Whereas at uni, you're sent to the wind and you have to learn for yourself. You get guided, but everything's on you. And it's now I teach myself to do stuff off YouTube, and I'm quite good at teaching myself how to do stuff. And I wish I'd learned that when I was at school. But yeah, uni
it
really
is good. It is good for that. That's what it taught me as well.
Yeah.
There's very little. The help's there, but a lot of your projects are on your head.
Yeah.
If you need to figure something out, it's going. That's how I taught myself to edit and all that. It's just off YouTube tutorials.
Yeah,
that's just the way, wasn't it?
And so I didn't flunk out or anything, which was good.
Sorry, Rich. One thing I've actually been dying to ask JT: what was your classmates and stuff like that? What was their kind of? Did they know how much of a die-hard carp angler you were? Were they? Were there shocks as you walked in, actually turned up to a lesson in like the first year and stuff like that?
It's as you know, university is a mad old situation of loads of people being thrown together from all different walks of life, and just because I was going oi oi and wearing green clothing probably didn't set me too far apart from a lot of people. But everyone knew I was a fisherman. With the amount of fishing I was doing, it'd be hard not to know.
Yeah. It's just, did you get people asking to see pictures and stuff like that? Because to people that aren't in it, it's an odd hobby for some people, isn't it?
It is, and it's really difficult to explain. And again, this would be 2006, 2007, so we're right at the early stages of camera phones, and I don't even know how to got photos on there. If I did, I certainly didn't have loads of photos on there.
The old days of the Motorola Razor and stuff like that, the old flip phone.
Yeah.
So you graduate, and
there was another year in between there. So when I finished that first season on Razor, that's 2007. I didn't graduate till 2009. Okay. So in the interim years, I fished over at Silvermere, summer of 2008, and caught a few. Really enjoyed it. I've met a lot of guys like Dave Magg and Ben Owen, Sam Healy, all of those guys who'd fished Silvermere, and it was a eclectic mix of fish put together in a bizarre little pond with loads of bream, really shallow, different fishing, far different to anything I'd ever done before in terms of your fishing into milkshake. And I really enjoyed it. It was a mad place, from being on Raysbury where you might not see anyone for weeks or days, to go on to Silvermere where you had a golf course around the lake, and some of the best spots were fishing half a rod length off a bar. It's just so different, but I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it.
We were talking about serving alcohol as opposed to gravel bar, aren't we here?
Yes. Sorry, yeah. So there was 2 massive spotlights on the front of the bar that lit up the lake, and there was a spot in front of there where I think they'd extended the patio for the bar out, and they'd dug out the lake, because the lake was generally, you could wade across it. It was sub head depth, and there was this spot in front of the bar that was really deep, and then there was a shallow bit that went up, and in the winter I caught my fish off a rod length off the bar. This
is like you alluded to there, super silty lake. Did the presentation side of things need thinking about?
It did at the start. I spent a while fishing chod rigs and trying to fish out into the abyss and fishing out in the middle, and then all of my fish came within a rod length of the bank or a pole's length of the bank, and I was just finding these spots and then either casting onto the far margin or doing whatever I was doing to get the rig out there, but they were all taken within a rod length of the bank.
What spots were they that you were looking for? What made them stand out?
So they weren't covered in 2 foot of silt.
Right. It's firmer spots.
Yeah, really nice firm spots where you could present. And at the start, as you can imagine, fishing on kind of deep silt, you'd be fishing like a foot long rig, and you'd be fishing out in it, and your rigs were coming back in, and your baits were naff, and you're just catching bream out of there, but you just couldn't, or I couldn't seem to catch the carp fishing chod rigs. And I think when you did see the fish, when they're feeding, where you might have a bait presented, they might be half a foot below that. And you just I don't think they were overly riggy in terms of they're getting rid of the rigs. I just don't think you were presenting right. Maybe a solid bag into the silt would have been the one, but I caught mainly out the margins, either far margins or near.
Huge leap of faith, isn't it? If they're up to their gill plates in silt, to then resolve to put your bait at that depth.
Yeah, just
out
goes
of
against
sight.
Everything you've ever fought. And you've got to remember, I'm coming to this off the back of fishing with a boat where even if I can't see the bottom, I'm placing the rig down. So the minute you're casting out and barely getting a drop, because it's A, shallow, and B, you don't know when it's hit the bottom, it's just a complete culture shock. So I was casting onto the far margin, I was fishing a washing line rig onto the far bank, and the 2 guys that had they probably did it a little bit before me, the 2 Hoff Gardner brothers, incredible anglers, very, very accomplished, great technical, and they've got a resume, a big carp between them that they speaks volumes. So great anglers. But I kind of did that as well, and that was a good way of fishing to those far margins. But what the golfers fought, seeing like 3 rods, 3 lines bowstringing across to the far margin right onto the green.
What were the takes like on the old washing line? Would it erupt in the far margin and crack and you're away, sort of thing? Sometimes
it would be just, you'd use a heavy bobbin and it just drop, and that'd be it. And other times it would almost drop and then go as they were taking off at speed. It was just a unique, strange method. And sometimes you'd have to go around in the morning because you might have hooked a bream. So it's this really fine line between having it tight enough so that you could get some tension in the line, but not so tight that a bream wouldn't pull it out. Because you go around in the morning and the what was slack line would be pointing out, and there'd be a 4-pound bream
attached, like bungeed to the
Yeah.
bank stick.
And it was hard work because you might have to walk backwards and forwards 4 or 5 times, and it might be a couple of 100 meters round to
Were you
get it
taking a
right.
fresh rig with you and hooking them and re-dropping? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is once again like boilie fishing. Are you,
Yep.
you can halves for this, given the silt, or
No,
the
just
fact they're hard spots.
Yeah,
You're able
just
to
18 mil boilies.
18s.
Yeah.
Because of the bream.
so many bream.
Um,
If you used a lead over kind of 4 ounce, the bream would hook themselves and not give you any indication.
yeah. So you quickly binned that as
Yeah.
as an
And
idea.
you just there's nowhere I've fished before or since that's like that, and you just kind of have to learn as you go. And then at the point where I'd kind of worked out what I was doing, it was time to go back to university, and then I didn't come back until my reading week in November. But by that point, I'd kind of worked out how to catch them if I was on them, and I had a bait that was working, rigs that were working, and it all kind of fell into place again in that November period.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit about the appeal of the fish, because arguably it's a tough sell. Fish like polo, for instance, not beautiful.
No, they were just a mad old mix of fish that had been brought in from who knows where. They had a lot of history, and the thing that really excited me about it was the guys that I've met in the last couple of years. To them, that was like a local history lake, and their enthusiasm for it. They'd all caught it. It was like they'd all had a go and caught some or all of them, and it was like a badge of honour to them. And when you're hearing all those great tales, you've kind of just got to roll with it. And I wanted to get a bit of it, and it was something so different. I mean, it couldn't be any more different from Raysbury, but it was really enjoyable in its own right.
Talk us through this.
So that's polo.
Yeah.
There was 3 big ones in there at the time when I fished there. There was polo, white scale, and clanger, and they were all quite different looking, all big, kind of quite plain looking mirrors. And then there was 2 other 30s. One of them was big tail and the pretty one, and they all had a rich history, because big tail, that was a 30 that I had, that was in Terry's first book with him. I think he had it at 17 pounds back when he was really young. So they got good pedigree, and they've been in there a long time. And yeah, just really enjoyed fishing for them, and the fishing was so different.
What went on with its tail, JT?
So that had been lost on the bank.
Right.
It flapped and come off to someone.
And obviously the age of that fish, there's quite often fish will regrow their fins, won't they, for that otter damage or whatever. In this case, it's so old, it's not.
It
quite
lost
fresh
its
there?
tail a couple of years before that, and that was a little bit of regrowth, believe it or not. It lost its entire bottom lobe.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it dropped right down in weight, because it was almost 40 pound when that happened. It lost its tail, and it dropped down, and then it was on its way back up. So I had it once in the summer at, I think, 36, and then I had it here in November at 39.10, I think.
I mean, actually, I've done it a disservice. I actually can see I can see the appeal of that fish.
Yeah,
Huge head on it, mate. That
Yeah.
isn't you, by the way. I don't know who that is holding the fish, but it doesn't look like...
it's definitely me.
Yeah. But yeah, we've got a bit of flecked on going on at that stage, JT.
Yep.
Yeah, you're on that. You're on
Influenced
the
by
trail.
Beadle, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. Big fins, big
Yep.
head, big mouth.
Didn't fight.
Right.
Just reeled it in
Another
like a dog
bream.
on the reed.
May as well have been.
Yeah, could have been.
Yeah.
Could have been. Came in, and yeah, that was the start of a really nice run of fish there.
What was the boiler you were using at that stage? Had you moved off the Ice Reds by now?
Yeah, that was on Perfection ground baits.
So, and am I right in thinking that James Davis was using that? Is that part of the reason?
Yeah.
He converted you onto that stuff.
Yeah, he converted me onto it, and that bloodworm bait. Bloodworm, I think, had fallen out of favour a bit by then, but the bait was really tough, and it held up well against the bream. They didn't seem to like it, and I switched onto that bait, and it transformed my season on there. I went from catching, I think I caught 2 fish in quite a few nights, and then I was catching 1 every other night on that stuff.
And you're convinced it's down to the bait?
It's a combination of things. I was fishing right through the summer. As you get through to the end of summer, fishing starts to pick up. You've also learnt what to and not to do, and as a result, the fishing picks up as well.
Did you find that the carp were feeding at different times to the bream, and how did they sort of overlap, and how could you make sure that you had presented baits when you needed them to be presented?
I caught fish at all different times. The ones I caught in the winter, they were generally during the day. Polo was probably the earliest, probably about 7 in the morning. The others were during the day. Caught a lot of bream overnight, but also caught some carp overnight. And it was just about, again, being persistent and just taking the time and the effort to get those rigs back out, because it was so easy to get a bream at 2 in the morning and just leave it in the butt rings. But actually, casting onto the far margin, going around, getting the rig, clipping it on, dropping it in, coming back. It did take time, and But that was a good thing about, again, that summer I was just fishing all the time, and it just
so you're not worried if you're tired the next day.
No.
You're going to have a kip in the afternoon.
You could have you could have a nice siesta in the afternoon.
In terms of stock,
Mm-hmm.
Run us through what you were aware of, and it's relatively low stock, isn't it, Silverman?
Yeah. So there was 3 big uns. There was white scale, polo, and clanger, and then there was 2 other 30s, and then an upper 20 common, and there was a probably another 10 between mid doubles and mid 20s.
Feels a bit like you kind of catch the big uns at this phase of your angling.
Yeah,
You're not being.
I did catch quite a few out of there.
Did you?
I probably had 15 fish,
Yeah.
a few repeats, and then that's white scale.
That's white scale, right?
So I caught that 2 days after I caught polo for the second time. And
Okay.
that was 46.
So this is November as well.
November, yeah. That was
46 there.
46, yeah.
How did they get so big in that lake?
Must be a lot of natural to support them, but they also saw a lot of bait over that year from various different people. And yeah, they just pushed through. You know, polo was up at upper 39s. Clanger didn't come out until the March of that year when Terry Hoff had her, and she was 40. She might have even been bigger. I think then Ben, who worked in the pro shop, he had her as well. She might have even been bigger. She might have been mid 40s, but they were obviously doing well, considering they were old fish.
Yeah, I mean, this fish here, white scale, there's pictures of it in Terry's second book, I think, looking arguably in less good condition than it does there. I think it looks particularly clean there.
Yeah. It did
young.
get kind of red blotches on it during the
Right.
summer, almost like a kind of epoxy type thing, but yeah, it looked in epic condition here.
So for those who can't see the picture, we've got, you look like you're in front of some roadies or something there.
Yeah, that was taken on the golf course.
You're
Just
actually on the
on the golf course. Yeah, that's on the edge of the fairway, probably on the rough.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Very sort of clean mirror.
Yep.
Big scales around the gill plate.
Yep.
Short head. Sort
Short
of mouth
head.
very much on the front of the head.
Very much so.
Complete contrast to the Marlow
Yeah,
fish.
yeah.
Which is very much
Barely
underneath.
got a top lip.
Yeah, but presumably a female fish, that one, looking at the shape of it.
I reckon
you
so.
could guess.
Yeah.
Whereas I think clanger, which was a fish that I don't think you caught, you must have had a gap because you caught it, I think, when you worked at Korda, didn't you?
Yeah, just the year before I started. So
Or was it a more of a muscular carp?
It had big
great fish.
shoulders.
I think your pictures might be amongst my favourites of that carp from memory. I haven't seen it for many years, but
yeah.
What was the break about? What made you go back?
So I always thought if I could catch 2 out of the 3, that'd not be bad going, and it'd probably be time to go on. But I got a Yateley car park ticket in the January, and that was it. There was nowhere else I was going to go. I was only going there.
Mm-hmm.
All signposts pointed to Yateley.
Okay.
And that was just having been around James and being in my generation. Yet the Yateley car park was the pinnacle. So I was going there come hell or high water.
And that actually was a hugely significant time for you in terms of the people you met, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned before that it wasn't so much about the fish, which we all know they're well documented, and actually many of them were coming towards the end. But the anglers, many of whom are still friends today.
Yeah. You know, and even going back to Tol Pits and some of those, I still speak to the guys from there. Been so lucky to keep in touch with so many, and some of those guys, they're still the same guys you bump into on the circuit and the different lakes you turn up, and you've either fished with them or you fished with their friends before.
You say lucky, but it feels to me like you're good at keeping in contact. Are you a good networker?
Sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, I can be. There's other times where I'm pretty sure I've fallen off the radar, but I like people. I like speaking. I like nice people. I happily spend all my time with good people. But on Yateley, you hit the nail on the head. For me, the things I look back at Yateley and really, I just remember similar to Raisbury for the fishing and the freedom. But when I went to Yateley, it was about the people. There was a real sense of camaraderie. I met Gaz, James Davies, Hemp Boy, all these people you'd never meet in normal walks of life, and you just put together. But there's like a common sense of goal, and it was just fantastic. And I just had a summer of just so much enjoyment.
You were only there 1 year.
Yeah, I had a ticket for 2 years.
2 years.
I fished. So 2009, I fished there really hard. I think I can't remember how many I had. I didn't have any of the mirrors.
Yeah, lovely. One lovely common stands out for me.
Lovely common.
Yeah.
And then I had a couple of the stocky mirrors. I think 3 or 4. But then for me, what sticks in my mind is the people, photographing different fish for various people, just again living a hazy summer Yateley dream. It was just fantastic.
Well, isn't this around the time that like Gaz famously like poisoned himself with tea or whatever,
Yeah.
and the way you were living was actually pretty extreme.
Yeah.
Presumably, especially for Gaz, because he's having to travel.
Yep.
Whereas you potentially could stay at the lake.
Yeah, I used to do all sorts of stuff because you had a 48-hour rule at that point. So you could do 48 hours and then you'd have to be off for 48 hours. And what I'd do is I might do 24 hours, then pull off for 24 hours and then be back for 48. But I wouldn't be pulling off for 24. I'd just be sitting there drinking tea and living the dream.
And was that as difficult in terms of hard on the body as it sounds like it was for Gary? For Gaz, sorry.
I don't remember it being that bad, but
Yeah.
I mean, you'd get through 4 pints of milk, a bag of sugar, and probably 10, 12 litres of water in an evening if the mob descended on you. But it was just, I don't think I was quite as sensitive to it as Gary, but there was a few times I did feel
Call him
delicate.
Gary now as well.
Yeah,
I think it's
classic
catching.
Gary Valentine.
Sorry, Gaz. But the socials are epic, and you're learning from other people because you've come out of the wilderness really here, haven't you? Raisbury is the Wild West compared to the car park. All of a sudden, everything's under the microscope. Your angling is under the microscope. Everyone can see what everyone's doing, and yet people are still sharing.
Yeah, and maybe to your detriment. When I went on these other places, I'd never really met anyone that had caught them. I'd maybe read the odd bit, and you'd see bits and pieces. There you go with Phil Buckley,
Shot, yeah.
inventor of the soft hinge rig. And these are guys that I can't speak highly of enough.
Yeah.
They're just lifelong friends that you've made on the bank there. And I think Phil had actually caught them and gone by that point, or this might have been the year before. I can't remember.
Great story. I mean, the story Phil told of his Arthur capture on here, I think it's just a great story, one of the great carp angling stories.
And I was fishing on Silvermere, or I'd come down to see him on the weekend.
Oh God! Here's the other inventor of the soft hinge rig, along with Gaz, Elliot.
Yeah.
And
everyone looking very youthful.
I know.
But this is 14, 15 years ago now.
You wouldn't catch Elliot using flash now.
Nope.
Shuns it.
No, it's we just photographed the pineapple for Jason just after that shot. I think that's
Jason
what we've
Gilbert,
done.
is that? Yeah.
And I can't remember what we were talking about.
Just car park vibes, mate. I mean,
it was
I think we'd sit there. That's the picture actually. So
okay.
yeah, the pineapple not caught that much, was it?
No, but the thing I remember about Yateley, and I can probably see it a little bit clearer with the benefit of time, but I'd already become so immersed in Yateley when I turned up that I already knew how I was going to fish, and I was going to fish tigers with a little bit of yellow, and this was going to be the dumb thing, and that's how you're going to fish with a bait boat doing this. And
so the Darren Miles effect, really.
Yeah. And you're right, you're on that small microscope, everyone's fishing out, where the spots are, this. And looking back, there's a lot of things I do differently, but at the time it was so enjoyable just being part of it and fishing there. And I think I did a lot of time that year. I did as much as I could, and I had started working at that point, so I'd taken a part-time job doing bits and pieces, but I still fished as much because this was like my last hurrah. And again, knowing what I know now, I'd do it all very differently, but I didn't. And I wouldn't change it for anything. It was very enjoyable.
What were your highlights in terms of what you saw, the angling that you saw?
Even just getting up a tree and watching those fish swimming around and seeing Heather the lever swimming out there, that was enough for me. That was enough. And some of the captures, some of the stuff like Hemp Boy, like a person, probably shouldn't mention his name, he'll hunt me down, but some of the angling he did and some of those other guys, the captures, Gaz's capture of Heather, great bit of angling leading up to it. And I was actually away on holiday at the time, and I thought him and James called me up and they knew I was coming back that day, and I thought, they're pulling my leg. She hasn't been out. They're just pulling my leg. She had. And it was, I can't put my finger on one particular catch. I can remember I lost one in the curly quite long out, probably start of autumn. And that hurt at the time. That really hurt.
I think it was a mirror?
In my, of course, at the time when the hook pulled, I did think,
yeah,
of course I thought it was a mirror, because you always, every time you get a bite, you think it's going to be the one because you want to play it like it's the one or one of the ones. But I mean, I don't have sleepless nights over it now, so it must be buried deep down.
And actually, it was around that time that I thought it was the first time we'd met, but actually it wasn't. I came to see you. We did a mag feature. I remember you fishing really. Maybe you weren't actually fishing them, but you had these super long chods. Do you remember those?
Yeah, yeah.
I think you indicated earlier that you said you were using long chods, but these were the longest chods I still to this day I've ever seen. Actually. Yeah,
I used to fish quite long chods. I always found the longer they were, the better the hook hold, but you might get a few more bites if they're shorter. I don't remember fishing them that kind of long. Chig rigs.
No, Zods.
I'd quite happily fish them as high as my cup is off the table.
I think so. Yeah, my memory was that they were and not super curved, just like a gentle.
Yeah.
And you also showed me a lead system which I haven't seen anyone use to this day, and I thought was really clever at the time, and still think it is actually.
Is that
we don't use it yourself?
The kind of running in line.
Yeah,
style.
Breakaway inline that becomes a running lead, then becomes a drop off. Yeah.
I caught a few out of the car park on that system, and it was. I can't remember why I came up with it.
It's a great idea,
but yeah,
it's got all of the impact of an inline lead, which you want on the car park, especially if you're dropping with the boat. You don't need to cast it. Then they drop the lead on the take, presumably, and it switches to a running lead. So there's a degree of tension that they don't understand because they're not used. Running leads aren't used, and then when it needs to pop off, like if it's snagged or immediately afterwards, it just drops off. Yeah,
I never used it since, but I did use it on there quite a bit, and it was a smart little system. It could be a pig if you didn't get it right, but for dropping from the boat and stuff, it was quite nice.
I really liked it. I mean, and there was some crazy angling going on there. I say crazy. It's just people thinking out the box. I remember also going down and doing a shoot with the Wizard, Chris Felton, and his anchor, his great big leads that he would drop from the bait boat, which were like, I don't know, I feel like
pancakes.
Yeah, they were like the size of a small saucer, weren't they? People might remember them. The anchor leads with the swivels in the middle makes a lot of sense. But how the heck,
like a cow pack.
Tough to present, right?
You used to have to. He had a parachute bag full of PVA foam, and he'd drop it from the boat, and it'd almost go like a paratrooper down. Yeah. But there was all sorts, because you're fishing for such a small amount of fish, and there's not a huge amount of presentable spots out there. In the summer when it was bad, it was solid weed, and then you drop down, you'd have these spots. There were some little spots, but you were fishing on those main rumble strips, and everyone was raking them short, and you're kind of just trying to find that edge amongst that everything.
Is the most standout bit about the fishing that was done on that lake. I think is that I'd say aside from the whole weed and noster thing, you were in someone's grave every time, in the same spot, presenting over what was left of their bait. How can you gain an edge in that situation?
Looking back, it's bizarre, really bizarre, but at the time, again, I just felt like I had forever, because I had 48, and then I'd come back after 48 for another 48. So
and the middle bit was socializing.
And it was, I never felt bored over there. You just I always looked forward to it. I always enjoyed it. If I was working full time, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it, or wouldn't been able to do it. I wouldn't have been able to bump along and fit in.
It's really interesting that you were kind of getting some awareness that it was your last hurrah. I like that. I like the idea that you think, do you know what, life's starting to catch up here. Do you think could you've longed it out a bit and had another year and maybe tried to get one of those mirrors?
Maybe, but the way the world worked, I ended up rolling in and kind of falling into a job which I quite enjoyed and was busy, and then where my fishing had taken the priority, I kind of focused on making a career and trying to make something of myself in that element, and I did go back and fished.
Was this the security career you had? Events and security.
So kind of event security. So I was in that, and I kind of started working almost full time that autumn, and then the next year, by the time it came round to the summer when the season started, I was working full time as a manager, and there was no ability. We were into events in the summer. That was our busy period, so there was no time for doing 48 on, 48 off. Being the new guy and trying to, as a junior manager, I was desperate to prove myself, and just cracked on. And I did do a couple of nights. I went back in the summer, and that was a really mad old session, because I'd been fishing for the big orange in the island swim down to the right, and first night I was convinced I'd hit the big orange, and it was a massive scream, horrible thing. And,
right, one of very few in that.
yeah,
lake,
and I was convinced as I got the bite, I was convinced it was big orange. I thought I'm finally going to get my moment. No, big bream. Then the next day, Kingy caught baby orange, with it, which is his story to tell. But it was the way Mad Martin netted that will live with me forever. It was incredible. And then after that, we went and buried the black mirror, and just that was it. It was
August 2010.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and so 2010, I didn't really do very much fishing. I did a little bit here and there, and then it was when I got round to 2011, I'd settled into my job a bit more, and I went round the Lee Valley because that was on the way to work from Watford round to where I was working at the time, and yeah, I fished in the Lee Valley, fished a few places around the Carp
I didn't
Valley.
even know you'd fished in the Lee Valley.
Again, that was seeing Bailey fishing at a few different places, and a few mutual friends kind of got sucked into there, and it's different. I enjoyed it. I fished a couple of the lakes on that slight plain, had a few out there, and went back and had the odd one now and again. Fished Friday Lake. Yeah, it was all very enjoyable, and it was again coming out of Yateley, like the pressure tank, where it was so nice to go somewhere where there was kind of a little bit, there was no rotation, there was no pressure, there was no people walk around, you could just kind of fish and sling chods out and catch them.
Is it the most strategic angling that you've done, Yateley, in terms of even related to how you get into the swim you need to be in?
I've done some pretty strategic fishing in terms of getting the bait in and the fishing right since, but certainly everything else that goes with the fishing at Yateley made it so unique.
Let's have a look at your Yateley highlight. Well, not maybe not yours, but certainly the common that you caught. Yeah. Lovely fish.
Yeah, really nice.
It'd be nice to see it anyway, Tobes. But I feel like it's like a real classic looking carp.
Yeah, really nice.
So many ways quite similar to Red October.
Yeah,
really similar. Look at the same mould, really, aren't they? Possibly really. Red Bar Commons. I mean, who knows? That was always said. I don't really see a particular route. Maybe someone can fill us in on how they came to be. But certainly a lovely carp.
Yeah, it was really nice. Caught out at the edge in the gate swim. I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if I'd either been done over by Pearly Tail or missed an opportunity, but yeah, that was a consolation.
The gate swim had its residence, didn't it?
Yeah, Baby Orange and Pearly were in there a lot, and you were kind of angling with those in mind.
So are we looking at the car park behind the photographer here? You just come around the back of the bushes?
Yeah, that's right out the back of the swim, so the car park's stretching away behind you.
Yeah. Which you'd never realise. It looks lush and green, and actually
it's lovely.
Whoever is taking the photos is kneeling in the gravel of the car park. Yeah, it must have been incredibly sort of claustrophobic fishing in that gate when you knew the fish were there, and you had that camo screen up round the corner. You go and perhaps look at them. And
yeah, there was constant traffic going past the screen, walking out towards Trumptons and Waiting Man's, and it was just part and parcel. It didn't at the time. Now it just feels a million miles away from anything I've done since, but it just felt normal at the time, and it was great. There was always in that swim there was always people coming to see you, people say hello, people coming in and out, and it was really enjoyable. So
when you sort of landed again from your wanderings, Clanger has to feature, and by that time I think you'd taken a job here. Would that be right? Or?
I started the year after.
Okay.
But I'd fished 2 winters on Silvermere. I'd got a winter ticket in 2011, and I fished through and didn't catch. Steve Mogford caught Clanger that winter.
That's another name who's been an association with Silvermere going right back.
Yeah. He caught Clanger right out the middle in the winter. I had 2 fish. I think there was one called Baby Clanger that's there, and then another little 17. I had those in January. Again, a rod length out from the
same. You went bar. Back and hit repeat, did you, in terms of tactics?
I kind of knew where I wanted to be roughly. So having caught fish from the winter there before, it kind of felt right. And these were ones that had been stocked since, because there'd been a bit of a fish kill. White scale and polo had died, so it was just Clanger. If you're going to catch a big one, there's only one left, so I'm not going to tread on anyone's toes.
Again, it looks, looking at the picture, super high pressure sort of conditions. Sunny, and quite a few of your sort of captures seem to be.
Yeah. In the winter, I definitely look for a high pressure, bright sunshine kind of
crispy sort of days.
Yeah, and you want that leading up to a little bit. I'm sure those light levels play a massive part.
Is this back end of the winter?
No, that was January, February time.
So the right side of Christmas.
Yeah, the right side of Christmas. And I had that one, and as you can imagine, when I saw that come up, I thought, well, I've done it first bite.
Yeah.
Clanger, baby clanger that was. And then I had one a couple of weeks after, and then it froze up, and then I think Steve Mogford caught clanger. But it was nice fishing because it's nice and easy to walk round, and it's got a toilet, it's got showers, it's got all the amenities you want. So if you're doing 2 days between work, it's nice to be able to have those kind of levels of home comfort, and you can go and get, now I'm working, I can afford a meal out of the bar.
Nice.
So if you want to do that. And then I went back the year after.
With the receiver on the table?
No, I was never that brave. Never that brave. I remember going back in January 2013, and it was early part, probably it was the first week of January, and it was a bit of a lull for work, and I had a couple of days off, and getting there, and I know Chris the Wizard, he'd fished there and he'd caught breamy over either New Year's or around then, and it was looking really good. It was, again, nice, bright, high pressure, and I've walked onto the bar and the water was gin clear, and I saw a shape, and it was clanger, just there in the margin, gin clear, swimming up and down, chasing
the deeper bit you described.
Chasing swans,
right.
And it's probably only 4 foot out from the bank, and I've climbed up on this concrete plinth and looking down into the water, not giving a hoot what the people in the restaurant just there thought of me, and I'm watching clanger bombing up and down the margin, and it was the only one I could see. It looked really good, and so that going in the goose was a natural choice, and you're fishing over to there. It's probably 80 yards across.
Casting at the bar?
No, that would be brave. There was big perspex screens, but that was to stop the golf balls.
Yeah.
But what I was doing was casting onto the green to the left, then walking round. And originally I was using my baiting pole. I had an old BT pole that they use for measuring the height of stuff above the roads. And thank you, Darren. And I used to use that, and that was really good because you could hold a 5-ounce lead at full whack and drop it in. But what I was doing was setting a slackish clutch, walking round, and then using my marker rod with a loop and a PVA loop. You can walk round and then place the rig perfectly, lay it down, and you just know everything is bang on. And by chucking a back lead in, you've kind of got 6 to 8 foot of kind of shallow depth in the deep, and then it comes up and you got that plinth, and then it shallows off into the water. You can have a pretty tight line up to your back lead, and you've got a good line lay all the way over there. And I was dropping those out there. I don't think I had anything the first night, and then the second night I redid it, and I sat it out for the rest of the day. I think I might have had 2 nights available, and then kind of in fact no, it was late in the afternoon on the second day that I had a take, and again got beasted around by an unseen fish, and I was with Warren, and he helped me into the waders, and I went out, and it went everywhere, all the way around the lake. And you can imagine in that shallow water, you can just see bow waves, and it's miles off where it should be, and it's just carrying on going. So I waded out, put the net over my head, bit the draw cord, trotted out into the middle of the lake, not caring again what the people in the restaurant are thinking of me, netted it, and it was clanger. And that was kind of 5 years after I'd first fished on there, and it was nice to kind of draw a line under that one.
Great carp, a steely grey this time.
Yep. And that is right in the last glimpses of light. The sun was going down so quickly. It was a real rush to get that done, but the photos came out really well.
Did you say on the thing that Elliot took? Did Elliot take the photos?
No, so the light was not quite perfect, and Elliot very kindly touched up some of the photos just to sharpen them.
Yes. Yeah. So what, Warren, did your pictures presumably, and you slip that back and close the chapter on Silvermeer.
Yeah,
it's a great carp. It looks more like traditionally sort of, I don't know, I could be completely wrong. It looks a bit more male than perhaps the other big uns.
It looked angry, and from when I'd fished there before, it always felt like a loner. You didn't see the fish a huge amount because the water clarity was so poor with the amount of bream and the silt in there. It was rare to see it clear, and that's why a lot of the fish in the summer looked really kind of washed out and anemic. And when you did see them, clanger always seemed to be by itself, just a bit of a loner, a bit of an odd one. And
And what was the trap for that? What were we talking in terms of like baiting and hook bait and the like?
So it was just a small, it's probably a 3-4 ounce inline lead drop off, leg core, and then a short braided link, long shank with the blowback.
Full on braid? Because you could just drop it.
No, it would be
Coated.
like a coated braid.
Okay,
I
got
can't
it.
remember
Yeah,
which
yeah.
one it was, but it was quite a soft braid. And then I was just fishing a boilie with a little fleck of they're now called Sent from Hells, but back then they were just white crabs or whatever we called them, just with a tiny little sliver stat on top, because the water was so clear that it felt like you just wanted that little sight bobber. And that was the only rig. All 3 rigs were placed out in that trench in front of the bar.
Like right where you'd seen him.
Yeah, right where you'd seen him, and that was the only one with the white
Yeah.
hook bait. I think for some reason I thought it was my right hand rod that I caught it on, but when I read back about what I'd said previously, it was my left hand. So
And baiting wise,
just scattered boilies up and down.
But a bit though for winter.
Yeah, probably 20-30 baits.
Oh, so not loads. Yeah,
No.
You know, enough. I wonder how many he ate. Whether it was him that sort of, you're never quite sure, are you, whether they're going to take the prize hook bait.
Ate the one that counts.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit while we take a short break from the campaign side of thing. I know we discussed it. It wasn't long before you started at Korda.
No.
In product development, and you now work for Embryo. So sort of it's a different company.
Yeah.
We've left it quite late in the podcast to discuss this, but what is work for you with Embryo?
So at Embryo, I deal with, it's so difficult to answer because every week can be completely different. One week I could be out there getting my lily white hands dirty, and another week I could be at a computer writing some kind of planning application or a report for whatever needs reporting. But in a nutshell, I do a lot of digital spade work, and I do the things that make the good stuff happen. So some of the stuff like securing leases for fisheries and dealing with the legal side and all of that, the stuff that is very tedious. I deal with a lot of that stuff. But
you've always been a good organizer, haven't you? I think that was clear when you like a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
you liked, you know,
I love a spreadsheet. Yeah, I have my moments with my organisation for sure.
But I imagine if you've got, at any one time, Embryo presumably has lots of applications for, lots of correspondence, lots of
spinning lots
process.
of plates.
Yeah,
there's lots going on at any one time,
and drop the ball on any one of those in legalities wise, presumably, and it can be pretty bad.
It's also with time frames. You're looking at, say for example, moving fish. You've got a very, very small window when you can move fish so that they can safely get moved about and stocked in. If you miss that window because of something going wrong with a lease, you can put that lake back a year, and you've still got a year's lease that but you're a year behind your schedule.
Yeah, your growth is affected.
Yeah, it's a really rewarding role, and actually, as the longer I've been there, so it's 10 years this year that I've been at Korda, and I've loved every second of it.
Yeah, and
I think I've been at Embryo for probably 7.5 years now, and that's gone by in
Are you like the second longest member of staff behind Matt?
Yeah. So Matt started in 2014, and then I started in early 2016.
Okay, and presumably Matt is your kind of, if you're speaking to anyone, it's him most days.
Yeah, so Matt is my direct line manager, and he deals with everything that I'm doing. There's times when I speak to him more than I speak to my wife. And I know he did a podcast, and I've got nothing but love and admiration for that guy.
Yeah. You still enjoying it?
Yeah.
And how enjoyable is it? Is the, carp fishing is something that you've got a lot from over the years. It's given you a lot. How important is it you to sort of secure lakes for anglers and to make sure that they are fulfilling their best potential, let's say?
I get a sense of satisfaction out of these lakes that I never thought I would get. I'm surrounded, even though for the last couple of years I haven't fished anywhere near as much. I mean, it'd be impossible for me to fish anywhere near as much as I have at various times in my life. But I get my fix from being around carp lakes, being around carp anglers and watching them grow, watching fish that we've stocked at doubles come out of 40, and seeing, I went round Gordon's and Iris Lake the other week and saw a guy who'd caught a couple of fish at 20, and he was absolutely buzzing, and I felt this warm glow inside that I never thought I'd feel, because those lakes came about because of a phone call I'd made or an email I'd sent, and they've come all the way through the hardship, through COVID, and they're now coming out the back and really like exciting, viable fisheries in an area I love. And I get a massive sense of satisfaction out of that, which if you'd have asked me that however long ago, I just wanted to go and catch fish and do that. And now looking back, carp fishing has given me so much, and it's nice to be able to give something back. And the Embryo project has just nothing but positivity as far as I'm concerned. You know, we do so much, and even if it's just one lake that we help at a time and make better and create a new fishery from somewhere that was nothing, is fantastic. I find it so rewarding.
And obviously in the interim, you've welcomed your first child as well.
Yep.
So in a way, not entirely unexpected that fishing has had to take a back seat for a while.
No, and fishing will always be there. You know, and as you've probably picked up on my way through my life, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it properly. And you know, if I'm going to be a dad, I want to do it properly. And all of these things, I find it very hard to half give myself to something. I have to do all or nothing.
Yep.
And I've got no doubt, sorry Gemma, that I will be out carp fishing at some point in the near future. But hopefully these days, with a little bit more of a level head, I've got a little bit more restraint and less kind of selfish.
You sure?
We'll find out. Won't we?
No, and you moved your life from the middle of the Colne Valley right down south now. I mean, how's that change been?
It's been interesting. I was dragged, I think Jen would probably agree, I was dragged kicking and screaming out of the heart of the Colne Valley.
I mean, this was mid-campaign for the slippery seal, wasn't it? In Staines. Yeah.
And you know, those years after I moved, I spent all my time fishing still in the Colne Valley, like nothing had changed, just the drive was another hour. I wouldn't change it for the world. It's been a real breath of fresh air, and particularly during, you know, COVID, having a bit of a rural outlook and living in a slightly less urbanized area was brilliant and gave a fantastic outlook. And you know, there's plenty of fishing down near me.
And you obviously, you know, you've got friends down that area. You know, you're someone who's, you know, you built that you've come across a lot of anglers. You've stayed in touch with a lot of anglers. You know, I'm sure you count a lot of those as friends and stuff. And you know, got Gaz down there, haven't you, as well? Down your way now. So I don't want to entirely leave the fishing behind, because I feel like we've glossed over quite a big period of you know, when you were still out there and doing it. In my head, there's two campaigns that we need to talk about in order to give people a full appreciation of the fact that you didn't just stop fishing when Embryo happened and you know, fatherhood happened, although albeit probably has since you've had a kid. There is a lake down in Staines, which, you know, you're in Terry's book. You know, you were fishing for that fish, the forgotten mirror, whatever you want to call it, at that sort of same time as he was. And I think you come across fairly well in the sense that you left him to it and he left you to it. You were just at the wrong end of the lake, maybe. I don't know. I don't know, because it was Terry that finally got that one. I mean, you know, most people would struggle up against that kind of opposition, I guess. If that's how you saw it, I don't know.
I never saw it as opposition. What a gentleman to fish alongside of, you know, on a small lake. I left him alone, he left me alone, and we cracked on. I had a few very, very close encounters prior to him catching it, and you know, I had a couple of years after he went where I'd like to think I should have stuck a hook in it, and for one reason or another didn't. Mad fishing.
Hardest lake you've ever fished?
Yeah, in one sense, yeah. In terms of the fishing and just the monotony and the kind of, those fish shouldn't survive in there, but they do. And you know, they're gone now, but just a strange place to angle. You might as well be fishing in a field of grass at times. That's how it felt. And
you say about that they should be dead. And you carried out your own investigations, didn't you, about this?
Yeah, so I took the dissolved oxygen meter and had a little reading, and it shouldn't be supporting life, that lake, at times. And you're watching all these clocks in the angling, you're waiting for the fish, the weather, for everything to align perfectly, and it might only happen once every now and again, and you're waiting for that period. And I just, you know,
and for not, you know, in stark contrast to your early fishing, you couldn't be there all the time. So
no, but I am very, very when I'm into something, that's all I can think about. And there's times where I should have pulled off there and fished somewhere else, but I haven't, and that's definitely cost me fish. And as you look back across my fishing, there's been times where I should have caught more, I should have gone somewhere else, I shouldn't have ground it out, but I did, because I've got a very much a one track mind, and if that's where I want to fish, I couldn't bring myself to go somewhere else. And
I mean, you've got the mug there. Can you tell us about the mug before I ask you my next question?
Shout out to Dave Bain and Greg Catchpole for making me a glorious mug of me burying my target fish. Thank you.
Yeah, so I love how rough it is.
That's my fishing mug.
Yeah. And you did bury that fish, unfortunately.
Did bury that fish, yeah.
Yeah. Was it a relief that it was over?
There's a very weird... I'm not a massive believer in fate and luck and everything like that, but I found out my wife was pregnant literally like 15 minutes before that died. That's really choked me up.
Amazing. And that was almost like you moving out of one phase of life into another.
Yeah, it was. You couldn't write it. Literally, my wife sent me a picture of the pregnancy test. Like, we're pregnant. And then I got a phone call. I mean, I was sat with the boys at work, socially distanced, because this was during COVID. And I'd only just gone back to work, really. And yeah, he called me and he was like, that fish is dead. And I just burst out laughing because 15 minutes before I'd found out we were having a baby. Amazing. which was something we'd been trying for. It wasn't just... And yeah, it was just it's really choked me up.
Yeah, I can imagine, mate. No. I mean, I have some idea of, what you went through, for that. Was we had the same kind of journey with, and sometimes there's kind of this neat dovetailing in life, and maybe that's just one of those moments. But
it was a very weird chapter.
Yeah,
very weird.
And the one fish that we haven't talked about, and we're not going to talk a great deal about it because we're not going to say where it is or anything like that in terms of the publication, but that you've written a chapter for a book that's coming up. Wouldn't be right to jump ahead of the publication of that. But that's the Nutty Lane fish, Daisy, which kind of feels to me like the crowning achievement of what was 20 years of big carp fishing.
Yeah, really. I had another little blue spell just leading up to going on to Nutty Lane, where I'd come off the back of fishing for that big old Italian that Nick had, and I don't think it was there for a lot of the time, but you were clinging onto sightings that you thought might have been it, or other people reckon they'd seen it, and I stayed on there a year or 2 years longer than I should, and again I'd stagnated in my fishing, and I was ready to go somewhere else, and I finally bit the bullet and went somewhere else, and I caught a couple of real good ones very, very quickly. Caught a nice big mirror, and then went on and caught a couple of really nice commons, and I was just again on another roll, not quite as extreme as the winter roll before, but this was around work, and these were baiting campaigns, and putting in the hours, and it fell together really quickly, and it was really nice. And they weren't the world's biggest fish, they were kind of upper 30s, but really some of the most special fish that I'd fished for, again, or they felt at the time some of the real special ones, because they weren't in the public eye, and they were kind of tucked away and a bit more wild again, and I'd found my little groove, and I was really enjoying it. And then I'd caught those fish from 2 different lakes, and I didn't know where I was going to go, because in that little zone where I was fishing, all my mates were on other lakes, and I didn't want to jump on there and take over on their hard work, or seem like I was going to be treading on their toes. And for some reason Nutty Lane came up, and I managed to get a ticket. It had a very modern website. I went on, tapped away, and within 24 hours I had a ticket, and it was there, and I was good to go. And again, it was wild, really wild place, very forgotten about, very raw. And I had a year's angling on there, and it again reignited that fire. And when I caught Daisy, I remember saying to my wife, that's it, I can't, we were getting married the next year, so she wasn't my wife at the time, she was my fiance. I remember saying to her, that's it, I'm done, I can't do any more campaigns, and I can't do this anymore, I'm getting too old. And it's not so much on my body, but just emotionally, it's hard with the hours, with the work, and with the driving. I found it hard work, and then sure enough, I walked around the Slippery Seal Lake a couple of weeks later, saw it, and I fell straight back in that hole.
Do you know what I mean? and we'll look out for the chapter when it comes out, because it sounds like there's so much interesting stuff going on in your life at that time, and hopefully that bleeds across into the campaign. But I think the one thing that really stands out is how marked the first part of your fishing was compared to the second half, if you like. You know, that obsession, that kind of full timing, really. And then you're a working guy, and you're still getting the occasional amazing result. And I just want to say before we wrap this up, you know, it feels like it's far from the end of your fishing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got a few years now where, you know, your daughter is the main focus, right? Yeah.
I've always, well, certainly for the last couple of years, I've always gone down, you should do what makes you happy. Mm-hmm. Life's not a given. Life's too short to do anything that makes you unhappy. And fishing is what I do for a hobby. Mm-hmm. You know, I work in the fishing industry, and I'm lucky, and you know, I'm very, very, I don't want to say blessed, but I wake up every day and I love my job. I love the people I work with. And in your free time, you shouldn't do anything that feels like it's dragging, because you'll end up resenting it. And I've done some fishing in the last couple of years since I buried that one. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't grabbed me in the same way that, you know, it did previously, where I had to go and do it. Yeah. And it'll come back. Even just as I was reading up to come and do this, so I could remember some of the finer details, I was there and I was thinking, yeah, I could maybe go and do a night. I could do this. I could do that. That's looking good. And, you know, I've always got my fingers in pies. I still speak to all my fishing mates. I get my carp fishing fix, even though I haven't properly angled in probably 2.5 years now. I don't feel like I'm out of the loop. No. You know, it's still, carp fishing still means a lot to me. And this isn't me hanging up the gear. I'm not going to, at the end of this, list off all the tackle that's for sale.
No, and I don't believe that for a second, mate. And I look forward to, you know, hearing about you knocking out the big one on like your second night of the first campaign.
That'd be the dream, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Shod and spread.
Yeah. Yeah, well, listen, thank you so much, mate, for sharing that with us. Your big carp journey. It's been great.
Me.
Cheers, John.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.